again, for those online, can you let us know if the sound is working and if you can see the slides?
They can hear the sound and see the slides.
Sweet. All right, awesome.
You mitigated the problem.
Thanks again. We appreciate you all inviting us to Nevada to come visit you and share about procurement and benefit cost analysis. As I mentioned earlier, for those online who didn't hear me, my name is Angie Saavedra. I'm the director for the Region IX Grants Management Division. And with me is Heather Landeros, and she is a grants management specialist in our VAGO team. So just a little bit about myself. I've been with FEMA since 2014. I'm a lawyer by training. I've had both legal roles and programmatic roles at FEMA. Most of my career at FEMA was at headquarters, and I came over to Region IX in late 2021. And when I came over, it was in a legal capacity as one of the attorneys. And then in March 2023, I began as the Grants Management Division Director. I do love grants. I'm one of those people that actually enjoys it. And I like procurement. I used to lead the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team at headquarters. So that was when, I don't know if y'all, are you familiar with the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team? Yay, nay. Okay, so the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team is a team that FEMA stood up as a result of OIG audits that a lot of findings are related to procurement under grants. And so we stood up the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team, and the Office of Chief Counsel, so the lawyers took up the helm at the very beginning. And so that's why when I was a lawyer, I was lead for the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team. We had 5 attorneys and 5 program specialists. And since then, PDAT, as it's affectionately known, has transitioned over to grants. And they support really all the grant programs right now. I think a lot of the information is related to public assistance. However, the grant rules apply to every single grant, whether it's FEMA or any other. So they transcend and they really apply to mitigation grants, to preparedness grants, to public assistance, and to individual assistance grants for FEMA. So it is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. When I was with the team, we revamped a lot of the slides, and so this is what you'll see here. So I look forward to sharing them with you. Thank you again for having us. We really appreciate it, and hopefully Janelle has not blown up expectations and I disappoint you. That's how we stopped. Thank you, Janelle. But yeah, looking forward to the conversation. A quick note as we're going through the slides, if you have any questions, please ask them. As the question pops up in your head, it's likely that it's going to be relevant to the slide that we're talking about. And so if you ask it at that time, it's going to be relevant to other folks in the room. If you have the question, it's very likely that someone else has the question. And so please feel free to raise your hand. For those online, I'm not able to see the chat or see a raised hand, but I think somebody will be monitoring. Yes. And so Janelle will let us know if you also have a question, but also please, that invitation to ask questions is also open for online. And again, it'll make the conversation much more engaging and more relevant to you if we're able to insert examples of things that you're actually going through and experiencing. With that, the game plan today is you're going to gain general knowledge of procurement rules. This is, if you've never had any training on procurement, you know, you're not going to walk out of here being a subject matter expert. Certainly, I'm still learning quite a bit, but this training is intended to give you some highlights. Hopefully, when you are going through procurement, you then, based on this training, get maybe a light bulb or a red flag. Like, I remember they mentioned something about X, Y, and Z, and you can either go back to the resource, you can ask Janelle, you can reach out to your colleagues, Janelle can reach out to us so that we can help you in answering that question. So again, this is not meant, you're not going to walk out of here having depth of expertise on this. It's not expected, but hopefully you do take some nuggets, and it does help you get some light bulbs when you're actually going through procurement processes yourself. So we're going to focus on risk areas. What are the things that the OIG and FEMA, through our own monitoring visits, have identified are the biggest risk areas in procurement? So that's going to be our focus. And then we do have some tools and resources. The Procurement Disaster Assistance Team that I mentioned, they have an amazing website that has tons of information that is practical and that you can use. And so hopefully you jot it down. We'll have the link, the website later on. but certainly after this, that's one great resource. They also have webinars that you can access, as well as guides and then real life kind of templates that you can actually use. Some of the things that we're going to talk about, there are different rules that are applicable to state and non-state entities. So we're going to go through what those are. Sole sourcing, I think that one is a topic that everybody's very interested in. When can you use it? When can you not use it? And then some problematic contract types. I know that we're also trying to schedule a follow-up discussion on contracts specifically. And is that
October 10th.
it's October 10th? And so Sam Ladich, who's on the line, and I are working through that. And so we'll do a follow-up presentation that's more focused on contracts and contract types and contract provisions. But this will give you a taste of it. All right. First, we'll start with why are we talking about this, right? So it costs a lot of money to not follow procurement rules. This is some data. This is from the OIG from 2010 to 2017. I will say the data, it keeps on growing, right? We know that disasters are more costly. We know that we're getting more grants, which means that there is more grant dollars at risk. And non-compliance occurs. So from 2010 to 2007, the OIG found that there were over 806 million potentially ineligible contract costs that were due to non-compliance with procurement rules. From those costs, this is the breakdown of where those areas, those risk areas are. Full and open competition, so not bidding it out as you should, not allowing people to access and to be able to compete for it is one of the biggest mistakes. Affirmative steps, that is following a certain amount of, so it's called socioeconomic contracting. We'll talk a little bit more about it, but it's to allow wider entry into competition. Janelle?
Sorry to interrupt. You're changing slides here on the screen, but it does not change the slides on there. So I'm going to, I don't know if I can do it or not.
I wonder if the screen that we're sharing maybe is not the right one.
It's like right on the outside. It should be.
It should be. So what do you say?
Somebody's changing it because.
Somebody's changing them?
Yeah, I see her mouse. Yep.
So this is the screen that you're sharing, that's why. The other one where you put it. So maybe let's just, can you do the enable editing? Just click on that so that it closes out. And then maybe minimize the slides on this slide. Yep, there we go. Yep, it works. Can you see that now? All right, perfect. So that's the table of the top non-compliance steps. Cost and price analysis, we'll go over what that is. Missing the required contract provisions, that's one of the easiest things to comply with and one of the ones that are biggest mistake areas. So hopefully nothing else, if you come out of this, you know that there's a template for contract provisions and you know that you'll need to plug them into any contract. So based on that $806 million, 69% of the negative findings resulted in recommendations to take back funds. So I don't know if you all have had the pleasure of an OIG audit. Hopefully you haven't. But when the OIG audits, if they find something that is questionable, if they find question costs, they'll often have a finding and a recommendation to FEMA to deobligate costs that they find problematic. And so FEMA often, especially if the finding is corroborated and there was non-compliance, oftentimes is in a position where we have to take back money. That ends up putting the recipient and the subrecipient in a really bad place because oftentimes when those audit findings are coming out, it's after the fact, after you completed the work, after you've done all the things, paid all the contractors, and so now the jurisdiction is finding itself having to find money to pay back FEMA, and this is the situation that we want to avoid. Yes.
So just to be totally clear, deobligating is
exactly giving the money back.
Yeah, the act, when we talk about deobligating is FEMA will say, you no longer get this money, you need to pay it back. So sometimes it's disallowance, sometimes it's a deobligation, but the result is basically debt collection from FEMA. And then the other reason why this is important is, okay, so federal funds from FEMA, whose money is that? Yours, ours, mine, right? We pay hard-earned money into these taxes to be able to fund these programs. So it is really important that we protect those taxpayer dollars, that we think about them as our money, that we correlate that to what would I do if I was taking this money and I'm doing a project in my house? What would that look like? What are the steps that I would take if it was my own money? And that's what the government really expects you to do, because this is all of our money. And what happens is somebody thinks it's no big deal over here, somebody else thinks of it there. It's a cumulative effect. And ultimately it's a finite pot of money. So then what we end up getting is either a raise in taxes, which nobody likes, or programs get cut. So that is the eventual impact that all of us then have to deal with. So now we got the why, now we're getting to the what. What is procurement? Their rules are found in 2 CFR Part 200, and they're 317 to 327. So it's 11 rules. Doesn't seem like a whole lot. It is and it isn't. It's not a whole lot. There is some discretion there, but there is a lot of prescriptive rules that we must follow as well. I'll go through each of those later, especially as they apply to states and non-state entities, because again, there is a difference there. But the objectives. So why does the government put these rules? And I touched on this a little bit. This is our money. The government wants to make sure that we're getting the fairest price that we can, the most reasonable price, right? You want to get the most bang for your buck. The government is also trying to do that with taxpayer dollars, trying to protect those taxpayer dollars. Beyond getting the most reasonable cost, you also have some other policy goals, and that is some of the socioeconomic steps that I talked about. There's some equity considerations. There's also some environmental considerations that we'll talk through. So, but the primary purpose really is getting the most reasonable cost. Again, go back to, this was your money, how would you treat it? You're going to try to get the most bang for your buck. You're going to want to make sure that you're protecting these dollars and they're not at risk. One other thing in terms of the rules, I mentioned this in the introduction. The rules from 2 CFR are they're OMB rules. So the Office of Management and Budget sits within the White House. They're the ones who write these rules, who implement these rules, and these rules are applicable to all grants. So these are not FEMA's rules. We can't change them. We're also subject to these rules. There's also obligations that are put on FEMA for these rules that the White House has prescribed for us when we're using taxpayer dollars. Again, these rules are applicable whether you're dealing with a FEMA grant, Department of Transportation, Department of Education. They're across the board. If you're using federal taxpayer dollars, you're going to have to follow these rules. OMB made some recent updates to the rules, and I'll explain why this is important. So the important date that you need to know here is November 12th, 2020. Before November 12th, 2020, the rules that were applicable were found at 2 CFR 200, 317 to 326. And after this date, it's 2 CFR 200, 317 to 327. What's the big difference? The OMB added 1 rule. So you see that before it was 10 rules, now it's 11 rules. The tricky part is, and this, how you're going to follow it is, when did you make the award? Or when was the disaster declared? If it's an HMGP grant, you're going to look at the date that the disaster was declared. That's attached to to which it's attached. If you're looking at other mitigation grants, you're going to look at the date that the award was made to distinguish whether you go with the old rules or the new rules. We'll go through what the changes are. The easiest way that I find to figure out to make sure I have the right set of rules, there's this webpage that's run by the government, it's ECFR. What I do is I go to Google, whatever search engine you have, I put in 2 CFR per 200. The first website, the first result that usually pops up is this ECFR website. You click on it, it takes you to the 2 CFR per 200. On the left-hand side of that website, there's some functions that you can manipulate, and one of them is a date, like go to date. So you can plug in the date either of the disaster, for example, if it's an HMGP grant, or of the mitigation award that you're considering and that you're looking at. You type in the go to date, you click go, and then it will pop up the rules that are applicable. So there's no guessing. You don't have to have a whole set of 2 CFR books. You can just use that, and that's what I use to make sure that I'm looking at the right set of rules. Again, this is really important because it is a recent change, and so you're likely dealing with some awards that were made prior to 2020 that you're reviewing. And because there was a change in the rules that are going to be relevant and that are going to affect how you or a subrecipient conducts the work. Any questions on this part, the changes? And again, we'll go through what those changes are. All right. Another date that I want to point out is this August 13th, 2020 date, where there's a prohibition on covered telecom. So the White House determined that Congress that there was the United States had an interest in making sure that when we are purchasing with grant dollars and where we're using things, especially if it's government related, whether it be local, state, county, tribal, or at the federal level, that we're careful in any communication equipment that we're using. And so it bans the purchase of certain telecommunication equipment from China because of national security concerns. So that's what that is, and that is effective August 13, 2020. So after August 13, 2020, again, if the award is made or the disaster was declared after that date, you want to be mindful of that prohibition on covered telecoms. All right. First part, am I a state or a non-state entity? So how do you determine if you're a state entity? A state entity is going to be any state of the United States. So Nevada is a state entity. The District of Columbia, any of the U.S. territories. And then this is where it gets interesting, right? Obviously, Nevada is a state entity, but then any state agency of Nevada is a state entity, is considered a state entity, and any state instrumentality. So a state instrumentality could be, for example, a university that is public that belongs to the state of Nevada. So it's going to be an important distinction. Again, if you're a state agency or a state instrumentality, you're going to be considered a state entity. The rules that are applicable to state entities are 5 of them, based on that 11, the list of 11 that we saw. So first, you're going to have to make sure that you're following the procurement rules that your state has put out, right? So whatever Nevada's procurement rules are, that state entity, you're going to have to make sure that you're following those rules. Next one is socioeconomic steps, and it has a parenthetical of new. That's because it was a requirement that prior to the 2020 change did not apply to states, and now it does. So that requirement is those affirmative steps that we talked about. That's one of the top 10 mistakes. That's making sure that you are taking certain steps to open up the field so that not necessarily you're granting the award to minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, small businesses, but that you're allowing them to compete. That they know that this is out there and they can potentially compete. So it's not a requirement that you award them that contract, but that you open it up so that they're able to compete. And we'll go through what those steps are in a little bit. So that used to not apply to state entities, now it does. The other one that's new is domestic preferences. This was actually not in the old rules. It's a new rule completely. So it's one of those, we went from 10 rules to 11 rules. So this is about the United States wants to make sure that when possible, with taxpayer dollars, with grant dollars, you are doing your best to awarding to US-based companies. So that's what that is, that domestic preferences. So let's award to US-based companies, US companies. 323, that's recovery materials. It's kind of like our recycling rule. So it's the government wants you, to the extent possible, and it's not always going to be possible, but that you are buying materials that are essentially recycled, so recovered materials, that you're able to buy them from whatever source they're available, so that you're being environmentally conscious. And then the last one is the contract provisions. Again, we'll go over it in a little bit. So as a replay, if you're a state entity, you're going to have to follow the state procurement rules. You're going to have to do socioeconomic steps. You're going to have to mind domestic preferences. Again, if there's a U.S. company that's available, you should use that company. You should be recycling, and you want to make sure that you're including all of the required contract provisions. Yes.
Question on socioeconomic steps. One of the issues that I have as I'm looking through grants requests for reimbursement is that portion of a contract or that portion of the purchasing process that goes out to bid. Very rarely do I see somebody who specifically asks for those minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses that like. From the overall competitive standpoint, if a sub-grantee, if one of our sub-grantees just asks for a bid, is that sufficient to meet 321?
No. No, and we'll go through the steps, because there is a slide on what the steps are to make sure that they are complying with that socioeconomic contracting. And there's 6 of them. All right. Next is non-state entity. What's a non-state entity? That's going to be local governments, tribal governments. Even though tribal governments can be recipients in their own right, they're always going to be considered a non-state entity for purposes of the rules. You're going to have some hospitals, and that's really kind of not-profit hospitals, institutions of higher education, some, and then other private non-profit organizations. The institution of higher education mentioned, for example, I'm from Florida, go Gators, we're not doing well. This is like heartbreak. Although they just beat a team like 40 to like nothing.
I just been a Gator.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So my husband is like
I see to nothing.
Alabama, but
Oh, rivals.
I know. We cheer for each other unless we're playing each other. Big SXC family. Why did I get on that tangent? Oh, institutions of higher education. So University of Florida, it's going to be considered an instrumentality of the state because it is a state-funded school, right? So it is going to be a state entity. What we're talking about here, institutions of higher education, there's going to be some universities, some colleges that are not for profit, and so they're going to be non-state entities if they're not like attached or an instrumentality of the state. So just wanted to put that distinction out there. And then eligible private nonprofit organizations, they're always going to be a non-state entity if they're eligible to receive federal funding from FEMA. So now that we've determined what's a non-state entity, the applicable rules, it's all of them. So if you're a state entity, you have to follow the 5 rules that I identified. If you're a non-state entity, you're going to have to follow the full suite of the 11 rules. That means, just as a summary, is you're going to have to follow your own procurement policies and procedures. So if you're a local government and you have in your ordinances your own rules and procedures for procurement, you're going to need to make sure that you're following those. You're also then going to need to make sure that you're following Nevada state procurement rules or any tribal rules that are applicable to you. And then you're also going to have to follow the federal rules. So again, the requirements are much more extensive on non-state entities. And then that means all of the federal procurement standards, they're going to be the 11 rules that we'll talk about. Well, we'll talk about most of them. If there is, I often get the question, what happens if there's a conflict? There's generally not a conflict, but you are going to want to go to the one that has the strictest standard. So for example, if it happens to be that Nevada standards for X procurement issue is stricter or more prescriptive than the federal standard, you're going to have to make sure that you're complying with Nevada standard, because by doing so, you're going to comply with the federal standard, right? But the opposite is not necessarily true. So that's what you're gonna do. You're gonna have to look at all three of them and make sure that you're following the one that's the most strict. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, like where the state entities and local entities are here, do you have any staff that just does procurement and, you know, do they know all this stuff? You know, assuming they do, but I know most of the time it's kind of siloed away from the different departments. And so,
In the state and the listed entities?
no, between like if you work for Division of Water Resources for the state. But then there's procurement. Do your procurement people know these rules and do you know what they know? Because, so I work for like a special district of the state, so we're considered non-state.
Mhm.
And so we do it all in-house, but is the project manager, so say Division of Water Resources gets a grant. Are they responsible to know that the state procurement people who are working on that are doing it right?
Yes.
That's kind of what I was trying to get at there.
Yeah. Ultimately, the agency that is awarding the contract is responsible to ensuring that all of the procurement standards were followed, even if there is an office that's outside of their agency that actually manages this. And so it is a complicating factor in terms of how do we get the word out? How do we make sure that there's cross communication and collaboration, and that the procurement folks, that they do sit outside of the agency that is awarding this contract, are hearing the same information and are tuned in to the requirements that must be done. If they're providing that technical assistance and supporting.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And just like we're providing this training today, for example, if there's colleagues or other folks that you think might benefit from this, we're happy to do other presentations, so. All right, getting into the top 10 procurement under grant mistakes. This is an overview. I'm not gonna read through them because we'll have a slide on each of them, but you see that there's some that are in black and there's some that are in blue. The ones that are in blue are the ones that apply to state entities. Remember that state entities only have certain rules that they have to follow, but everybody else has to follow all of them. So all of these mistakes apply to non-state entities. The ones that are in blue are the ones that apply to state entities. Did I say that right? Yeah. All right, we'll go through the first one. Restricting full and open competition. So full and open competition is to make sure that all of the contractors, all of the companies that are out there that could potentially fulfill this requirement are able to compete for this work, right? So that you have an even playing field. If you're doing a sport, you're running a race, you have the equal access to be able to run the race. You may not win it, you may not be the most qualified, you may not be the fastest, but you at least have access to compete. The goal is that you're going to cast the net broadly, right? The more it's like supply and demand, the more folks that you bring in, the more likely that there's going to be one pricing competition, but that you're going to get a variety in terms of the skill sets that you might actually need. Full and open competition does not require that you award to the lowest bidder, because we also recognize that that might be the lowest bidder, but guess what? Maybe they're not a responsible contractor. Maybe they don't have the skill sets that you need. So this, having full and open competition, ensures that you're looking at the whole and you're getting as many competitors in the room as possible. So again, you're looking at price, but then also at the qualifications, the abilities, the responsibility of the contractor. Examples of restricting competition. So we'll go through like what comes up the most. This is not an exclusive list. There's other examples of how you can restrict competition, but these are the ones that are outlined in the rules and that we often see that come up. Requiring unnecessary experience. So what does that mean? So let's go back to you're using your own money and you have a house and your house needs a new roof. And your house is maybe 2,000 square feet, 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. You need to vet contractors who can do the work. Requiring unnecessary experiences, again, it's a residential house. It's 2,000 square feet. But when you're vetting contractors, you're going out and you're saying, you know what, I'm only gonna look at contractors that have done roofs for high-rise buildings. That's unnecessary experience. That contractor doesn't need to do a roof. They don't need to show that they can do a roof for a high-rise to do a 2,000 square foot house. You're now excluding from the competition the smaller companies who are perfectly able to do the work, who might actually give you a better price because they're a smaller company and can successfully do it. So that's what that means to require unnecessary experience, right? You need X, but now you're asking for X, Y, and Z before you even consider that contractor. Does that make sense?
This is use of geographic preferences. Does that mean you don't want us to give preference to like local, like if we do have a reason for using someone local, should we shy away from a preference even if it is
So it's
beneficial?
not shying away. So what this rule, so we'll go through the last one for those who are online. So she's asking a question about the example of restricting competition by using geographic preferences. So what geographic preferences says is that we're not allowed to, for example, in the bid documents, I'm going to allocate 15 points if you are located in Clark County. That's what we're not allowed to do because you're restricting competition, and maybe the contractor from a neighboring county can do the work just as well, has the capacity and can do it. So that's what that means. It doesn't mean that when you get the bids in, so you don't put that as a requirement. You're not giving extra points because you're a local contractor, because you're located in Nevada, right? Also, like Nevada, you can't do that. Like I want a contractor who's from Nevada. However, if you get the bids in, and maybe there is a local company, and part of the benefit of getting a local company is that the transportation costs of equipment that is needed are going to be lower. You can consider that in terms of this is more that there's a cost benefit here, and there's an ability to get stuff in sooner and need it sooner. So that's how you can consider it. Like you said, it might be more advantageous for other reasons and for reasons that are objective. That makes sense, but it can't be, I'm just giving you 15 points because you're a company that's organized in Clark County or in Nevada. Yep. The only exception that I want to say to that is licensing. So if you're needing engineering or architectural services, for example, there is a corresponding licensing requirement that often goes with the state. So that's where you can use quote unquote geographic preferences, but they're more tied to do the work in Nevada, you must be licensed in Nevada. So I need engineers who are licensed in Nevada. That's when you can use a geographic preferences, but it's not geographic, it's more about the licensing. Next one is excessive bonding requirements. So there's a rule that we won't discuss in detail, but within the federal procurement rules that you, when a contractor wants to bid for work, they need to get a bond to protect their work, right? Something goes awry, they can't do it, that's protected, right? The rule doesn't prescribe what the bond needs to be. It doesn't say it needs to be 10% of the total contract cost, 20%, right? So that is at the discretion of the local government, the tribal government, the state that's actually awarding the contract. What this does say, though, is like you can't exclude competition by requiring an excessive bond. You're by requiring that the company, the contractor that wants to do the work, pony up 70% of the total contract cost in bond. Because what's that going to do again? It's going to exclude maybe the smaller companies because they can't afford to do that, right? They don't have the ability to get a bond that large. So that is why that is restrictive of competition. Using brand names, that's kind of an easy one. We all know Kleenex. You can't say, I'm getting a contract out, but you got to use Kleenex tissue papers. If you're doing a construction job, you can't say the construction company needs to use John Deere equipment. Right? You're using brand names. You can, however, say because of the quality, right? Maybe you know that John Deere and Kleenex has better quality and it's up down your nose. So Kleenex or similar quality, right? That's how you can say it. So if you say Kleenex or similar, you can use it. If you say John Deere or similar, you can use it. So again, it's not saying that you must only use John Deere, but that you're expecting that quality of equipment for this contract because it's necessary. Last one is non-competitive contract to contractors on retainer. This is if we all work with contractors, right? Prior to maybe awarding a contract. And let's say that you have a contractor in-house who supports you with something else. And you are now finding that you need a contractor to execute a scope of work under a mitigation grant. So you have that contractor that's in-house help you write the scope of work for this project. And then you put it out to bid. And then that contractor that helped you write the scope of work bids for the work. Are they going to have an advantage against other contractors who didn't write the scope of work? They are. So that's what this is meant to get at, to make sure that those contractors don't have an unfair advantage because they wrote the scope of work, so they know exactly what to write in their response to the bid. This is one that I've seen quite a bit and gets a lot of folks into trouble. There is nuance to it because it's like, well, what about if they just they don't write the scope of work, but then maybe we just talk about it, right? So I've had a lot of questions on that. If you are ever going to get a contractor who you know could potentially do the work and may be interested in the work to help you or to discuss what that scope of work is for the award or for developing the bid, just talk to Janelle, talk to us so we can kind of guide you of where the guardrails are. Because there's some stuff that's okay, but there's a lot of stuff that could not be okay.
So if you made it from the beginning where you went out and asked, we're looking to put together a grant, we want your help with scope of work, and then awarded based on that and had different tasks to where if we received the grant, then we could authorize the next task, would that be okay with this? Or is that still?
It could potentially be problematic.
Okay.
So it depends on how much they, I can't sign up on this one. It could potentially be problematic. Again, it's one that's nuanced and it's on a case by case basis. And sometimes you can do it and it can be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if you do it, it's very clear that that contractor who then you're giving part of the work to had an unfair advantage because they kind of had the inside scoop. It's like insider trading, right? Trading. You had the inside scoop. You had that benefit of knowing what was expected. And so guess what? I can now write the response based on what I know because I had inside information and I had inside conversations with the person who's going to award the grant that other contractors who are in another county maybe and did not have the benefit of the service did.
Yeah, the problem that we're getting with as far as the engineering and grants is that if they know they're going to be excluded from being able to do the bigger, design project, why would they want to do the help with the grant? So trying to find a way that maybe we can,
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
but that's, if you do come across that, I think again, the best scenario is to reach out to Janelle and then she can reach out to us and we can have a conversation of what the specifics
okay.
fact pattern is because there is a way to make it okay, where it's like, maybe you could do this. It doesn't really get you into that space. But that is a consequence of this. That companies are like, well, I mean, I can help you, and this is going to get me $10,000 to help you write the scope of work, but then that means I'm risking the potentially $2 million contract.
Right.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Right. Okay, so before we go down that path, just talk.
Reach out because before you go down that path, you want to know what you're gonna what the consequences are. FEMA's never gonna tell you what to do or what not to do, but we're gonna let you know where you're getting to the border and then what the risks are, and then that's a consideration that you all need to make, whether you're comfortable with that risk.
Okay.
So to eliminate that risk of not being able to do an RFI because no one will bid on it, what about just allowing the two-phase RFP where you have everybody come in, assess the project? They can all ask them here the same questions and answers at the same time. Then they're all giving input on the scope of work. Then it goes back out to the second phase for the actual bid over the next 30 days. And then anybody who wanted to bid had the same opportunity to see, do, ask.
That could be a way of doing it, yeah. Because then you're opening it up, you have your advertising. So then maybe the people who saw the first one didn't see the other one, but it's not about ensuring that everybody sees it, but that everybody has the possibility to see that the opportunity is out there. So that's a way to structure it, where you could get that feedback and help, while not restricting competition, because you've opened up the field.
So if whatever contractor did the grant, it wouldn't restrict them because all of the others still have the opportunity.
Yeah, it's again, if all of them have the same, they have the same access to the same information, you're not restricting competition. It's when like that one contractor has the benefit that nobody else might have had. Okay. So if they all have the same information, then they all can write it with that same amount of information. Yes, sir.
Is it they have the same information or they have the ability to get the same information?
Thank you. They have the ability to get the same information.
That's
Yeah, because they might not, so maybe somebody doesn't come to the table, doesn't see the initial advertisement.
exactly.
Too bad, right? I put it out there in the newspaper, wherever it might be that I make my announcements based on Nevada law. And they could have looked at it, they didn't. I'm not drinking a lot of water today. So it is about the ability to, and not that they do.
We have an online question. John, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. So I have a question. Does this apply to contractors that help write the grant application as well?
We can't hear you if you are.
Can you hear me now?
We don't hear you, John. If you want to give, if you want to write it in the chat, we can read it for you.
Maybe while he does that, I can ask another question.
Yes.
So, where I work, we facilitate a floodplain management working group. And then we get FEMA cooperating technical partner grants. And so say we get awarded, and if we, say, okay, we're going to discuss the scopes of work for these projects and let all the contractors know that we're going to be doing that. Would that meet that requirement?
It could, depends on how you let the contractors know. So if you just contact a few contractors whom you know, that could potentially still be restrictive of competition. If you put it out there where it's like, hey, everybody, maybe a website or something that could be potentially seen by the public. And anybody who, happens to go to that information site is able to access the information, then that could be okay. But I think if you're restricting it to just a few contractors, say I know these 4 or 5 and maybe come to the table, that could potentially still be considered restrictive competition.
So basically, like if we followed our regular procurement of putting it on our website, posting it in the paper, and then just let it, but it would be, we're developing the scope of work at this new, and you can all are welcome to join.
That could be okay.
Okay, thank you.
Did they figure it out?
I asked them to type it in the chat. I don't know why we couldn't hear them.
Okay, we'll move on, and if they put it up, let me know. This is the other top 10 mistake, number 2. Oh, did I forget? I don't think I told you all about. So this little guy, the little OIG audit dog, Inspector Gadget, is that what that is? Yep. So when you see that in the slides, it denotes that it's a big issue with the OIG. That's what that means. So if you see a little Inspector doggy, that's what that is. The OIG doesn't like this, finds this as a big issue. That we don't have it. Okay. So not performing a cost or price analysis. So a cost or price analysis is required if you have a procurement of over $250,000. And the goal is to help you determine if the price is fair and reasonable. Go back to the house example. You're gonna you need a roof again, and you are trying to figure out what contractor you might want. Before you go out and get contractors to give you quotes and call around, it's the first thing you're gonna do. Typically, you're gonna go to your search engine. You're gonna be like, how much does it cost to do a roof of this size in Nevada? right? And you're gonna look at different articles. And you're gonna educate yourself, and then you're gonna find out, it's about 40 to 50,000. I have no idea how much they cost, it's just a guess. It's about $40,000 to $50,000. Okay. Now I go out to get quotes because I have a baseline from which to evaluate those quotes. I'm not coming at it without any idea of what it might cost to do a roof. That's what this is. Just having a baseline of like educating yourself with what it might cost to do X. Same if you're gonna go buy a car, right? Before you go to the dealership, you're gonna hop online and you're gonna do some research about what the MSRP is. And then you're probably gonna go to different dealerships to figure out what the range is. And it's like, well, if I want a 2018, whatever, RAV4, it's gonna cost me about 16 to 17,000 is what I'm looking at. You're gonna go Kelly Blue Book, is that? Yeah, Kelly Blue Book. You're gonna go to usedcars.com. You want to have a baseline. So when you step into that dealership and that car salesman who's really good tells you, you know what? I've got this amazing car. It's got 100,000 miles. I want to sell it to you for $21,000. What are you gonna do? Oh, thanks, but no thanks, dude. Right? So that's what this is. So it's very simple. Again, it's kind of once you start thinking of it as intuitive, what would you do if it was your own money? This is what the government expects you because it is your own money. And so the difference between a price analysis and a cost analysis. So the price analysis is going to be simpler, and it's looking at the cost for the whole. So I need a new roof. Contractor gave me the price to do the whole thing, 50,000. When you do a cost analysis, you're separating the elements. So the contractor comes back, hey, labor's going to cost me this much, equipment's going to cost you this much, and supplies are going to cost you this much. They're breaking it up. So that's the difference between a cost of price analysis. You always want to make sure again that you document this. So if it is that you did some online research, just put that in the file, but just make sure that you're documenting how you did this initial research to have a baseline of what it might cost to do whatever project it is that you're doing. A part of this is when you're doing a cost or price analysis, you're going to have to negotiate profit separately. It's a separate element of the price for contracts that have, especially for contracts that have no price competition. So if you're opening it up for competition on price, the profit can be negotiated as part of the element, but otherwise it's not. And then it always has to be done separately if you're doing a cost analysis. And again, this is a common PUG is procurement under grants. Question?
This goes back to the previous.
Okay.
He says, does the non-competitive contract to contractors on retainer apply to contractors that help write the grant application as well? We have a contractor that is doing the design work for our project and helped write our grant application. Are they ineligible to receive grant funding? Does that also apply to subcontractors?
It does sound suspect. So if they helped you write the application itself and you're basing the contract work on the application, then by extension, they helped write what the scope of work would be for the contract. So it does sound like it's closer to that restrictive of competition. What was the second question?
What
Was the second?
Let's see.
Subawards. Oh, subawards.
What contract?
So, I mean, generally, yeah, I think it's, again, just kind of follow the kind of the logic. If there is a subcontract, you have a prime contractor and there's a subcontractor that's maybe helping write part of the work, but then also bidding for the work. Are you also restricting competition? Like the logic just follows, right? So where are you excluding competition and giving the benefit to one prime contractor or subcontractor, regardless of the case, where other people who might want to compete for the work are not going to have it and are going to be at a disadvantage?
So if, and we hear this a lot. So a lot of the different agencies will have already a contractor on retainer. That doesn't matter, that they already have somebody that they're using for all different various things. they still have to go out for bid to anybody else.
Because even the state has good of the state contracts, where they've already all pre-submitted all their stuff, and the state has them on a list, and you don't have to go to bid if you have all these, if you use one of these.
So having pre-position contracts or contractors on retainer is okay, as long as one, when you initially awarded that contract, you went through and you made sure that you followed all of the procurement rules in awarding that contract, right? If you're gonna pay with it, you're gonna pay for that work with federal funds, you are gonna have to prove that that contract that was awarded, so even if it's a contractor that's already on retainer, that when you awarded that contract, you followed all of the procurement. Two other things is, if, let's say, because this question just came up, you have a contractor on retainer and you did follow all the procurement rules, so you're check the box on that, right? And I want them to do work with this new project that wasn't there before, right? But they have the expertise, they have the skills. If you are changing the contract in such a way that it wasn't, the scope of work that you're asking them to do was not envisioned or included in the initial contract, that's considered a cardinal change and a change that would require recompeting it. Or if the cost is typically so much more that it was not envisioned in the original contract. An example of that, let's say that I have somebody on retainer and I have them doing X work and I have paid them $100. And now this new grant comes along with this new scope of work and I know that they have the skill sets, I want them to do that work. But now the scope of work is very different from what was originally conceptualized, even though having to have them in the retainer. I'm gonna have to recompete it, and that's considered a potential restriction of competition, because when they originally got that contractor, when I originally wrote that request for bid or that solicitation, I didn't include that scope of work. And maybe had other contractors known that that scope of work was also going to be included in the contract, maybe they would have been like, you know what, I want to throw my hat in there. I want to be considered for that. Same thing if you're doubling the cost, right? Or if the original contract was $100 and now you're going to double it to $200. Same thing. Maybe contractors that would have thrown their hat in the ring and would have liked to bid if they had known that it was $200. But it was like $100, it's too small, I don't think we can make it work. But because of, economies of scale, for $200, yes, I'm interested in that one. But I didn't bid on the original contract because I was looking at it as just $100. And now it's $200. And I would have wanted to be considered if I had known that the work was gonna be $200. Does that make sense?
Does, it seems like we're going down an avenue where FEMA's just gonna assign, or federal government's going to assign a GSA rate for everything. A bucket of dirt, you can bid this much. A use of a type 1 front loader would be this much per hour, just like they do for disasters. And you have set rates or pre-funding things in response or preparedness efforts where there's GSA rates and you can't exceed those limits. $0 federal contracts for deployable resources to come in and build you a disaster home center with homes, restrooms, showers, community, everything you need, like when Lahaina or whatever happens. Federal government already has assigned GSA rates for all that. So
I don't know that we're headed, or at least from my perspective and my experience with procurements, I've never heard that, and I don't know that that's where we're headed, because ultimately.
I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it.
Well, but the reason why I don't think we're headed that way is because regardless of whether it's good or bad or the opinion. So ultimately, the procurement rules are to ensure competition, but ultimately that contract or whatever you award, it's a private transaction between that entity, whether it be a state government, a local government, and that contractor. So that's a third party transaction into which the government cannot insert itself in terms of negotiating terms and prices, only to the effect of just making sure when you're then paying it with tax federal funds, you can assure the federal government that it's the most reasonable cost generally, and that you have acquired qualified contractors and that you have not restricted competition in doing so. So the federal government considers that actual awarding of the contract a private transaction between two entities, and the government is not a party to that. So that's why I'm like, I don't know that we would go to that level. They are though, so at the state level though, you can have master services agreements sometimes. And so if those are procured competitively, the state can also set those. So you know what, we've already competitively procured all these contracts. They're in so worked with Texas, and Texas had a really, really sophisticated program of doing this, which was amazing. Because they did have all of this pre-position contracts, so they had ensured full and open competition prior to. If any jurisdiction that had availability to access that needed X, Y, or Z, guess what? The Texas government had already kind of negotiated this, had a rate that was negotiated, and that local government could access that, whether it be a service that allowed them, it was actually supplies and equipment that they would get, and then they could access that. So states can do a master services agreement kind of like that. The only thing is making sure that when the state's doing that, if they're envisioning that a local government or non-state entity is going to access that master services agreement and they essentially cut a passport permit, that they follow all of those 11 procurement rules, because remember, if you're a state, you only have to follow the 5. If you're an in-state entity, you have to follow the 11. So that is possible, and I've seen it done successfully at the state level. Is that?
I'm tracking. It
Okay.
just seemed like we're going down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I'll learn more about.
All right, number 3, engaging in sole sourcing without documenting the permissible exceptions. So there are 5 exceptions to sole sourcing. Sole sourcing is just, I'm gonna go to this person and I'm gonna award the contract to this person. The first one is new. That's based on the rule change in 2020. So it's micro purchases. The micro purchase right now, the micro purchase threshold set by the federal government is $10,000. And so if you're acquiring anything that's under $10,000, you can just say, hey, I'm gonna go to Home Depot because I know that they have whatever, X, Y, and Z. Hey, I'm gonna go to this contractor that I know, or I'm gonna use the contractor that's on retainer to do this work because the work is under $10,000. You don't have to compete. Number 2.
Question.
Yes.
Make sure that we're also using the most strict policy on micro purchases.
Yes.
Because Nevada is different.
What the micro purchase threshold?
Anything is 3 bids. So if they get 3 quotes for a purchase.
Okay, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So this is where, when we went back to that first initial slides, you're gonna follow the strictest requirement. And so if Nevada doesn't have a micro purchase threshold and you can just sole source, but whatever it is that you're procuring, you have to get 3 bids, then you're gonna have to follow that one, the Nevada.
That's in the handout, so that we.
Also, another question I have about that. So Nevada does not have a minimum amount, but you have to meet that federal amount plus get 3 bids. Does that apply as well if you are, let's say, we as CWSD did a grant from DEM, that would mean we would need to get 3 bids even if it was less than 10,000. Is that right?
Correct, yeah. So when FEMA allows us to manage the grant, we're the state administrative agent. Now the money becomes DEM's money to grant out. The state administrative agent and the state agency, we have to follow NRS 333.
Oh, okay.
It's complicated and we don't like it just as much as everyone else doesn't like it, but it keeps everyone off of that.
Just to clarify what you're saying, is it, when you're saying 3 bids, if we're talking like, something we would just go to Home Depot, or does that just mean you're printing out prices from Home Depot, Lowe's, and maybe Ace versus having to do a contract?
Correct,
Okay,
yeah.
just making sure
But we have to add onto that. Does Home Depot, does Lowe's, does Ace have a good to the state contract? If they've got a good to the state contract, getting 3 bids is not necessary.
That's true. And there's a lot, I don't know if Heather's sent out the list of the state contracts that you can use without getting bids or contracting at all. our state purchasing has gone out like the instructor was saying, and has done a competitive process already for us. And then you can just go on the list of contracts and you can use them. But
Yeah, for anything that I say, again, just go back to the strictest and talk about the federal here, but if you know what the Nevada rule is, or like this one, to call it out to make sure that we're qualifying it, because it is an important distinction that should not get lost. All right, third one is, oh, no, I didn't do. The item number 2, the item is available only from a single source. This is a very rare exception. It's typically used in something that's related to software, for example. There's only this one company that has this software that we need to use, and they have a patent and no other company has it. But we need to use the software to do X, Y, and Z. So it's an exception that we see rarely used. Typically, it comes in the kind of technical or software type aspect and scientific, some scientific sections by the side. I know when I had a talk recently, somebody brought up that there was a science related, I can't remember it now, but it's very rarely that it's going to be applicable, but it is out there. And again, it's going to often come up because there's a patent on the software, only one company has developed it, or there's a scientific reason that only one source can provide this good or service. Next one is exigency or emergency circumstance. Do y'all know the difference between an exigency and emergency? I'll start with emergency. So an emergency circumstance is when you have something that is, there's an immediate threat to life, health, public safety, or property. So it's an immediate threat to one of those 4 things. For example, your house. Or let's say City Hall in this instance. And there was a storm that came through and there is a tree that fell over. It hasn't fallen over completely, but it's teetering and you know it's gonna topple soon. And if it topples in the direction that it looks like it's gonna topple, it's gonna hit and ruin City Hall. That is an immediate threat to property. At that point, do you have the time, or does it make sense to go out, get 3 bids, to get do full and open competition, to have the time, which might take a 1 or 2 week process to get the appropriate contractor to come in? No, because by the time you have all of that done, guess what? That tree might have fallen and ruined City Hall and caused more damage than was originally there. And so that's when it's okay to use sole sourcing. That's an example of an emergency circumstance that might justify sole sourcing. You don't have the time. There's an immediate threat to one of those things. And this is an example, it's more public assistance. But it kind of brings it to life also. So you have debris. With a lot of storms, you're going to have debris that is caused. That debris is obstructing the road. That is the only way for this community to access the hospital. That is an emergency. There is a threat to life and potential health there, right? Because the citizens cannot access the hospital because there's debris on this road. And so that means that you're going to have to do whatever you can to get that debris out of the road as soon as possible to clear the way so that people can get to the hospital. People who might have been hurt during the events. Once that debris is on the side of the road, it's no longer obstructing, and it's no longer creating an immediate threat. So you cannot use that same contract now. You can't, there's not a justification there for sole sourcing because it's not obstructing it, right? So you're gonna have to get another contract to get it out of the way and to move it to some central location. So that's an immediate threat to public health, life, safety, property. An exigency is different in that it's often based on economy. So there is a potential for serious economic or other kind of societal harm if something doesn't get done quickly. One situation where there was an exigency circumstance that FEMA then approved some sole sourcing or said, you know what, this is compliant with the rules. was in Augusta, Georgia. So Augusta hosts a very famous PGA golf tournament every year. And the economy of Augusta, Georgia is almost solely reliant on that golf tournament occurring for its whole budget for the year. This tournament must happen. There was a storm that came through. And it happened a couple of weeks, maybe a month before the golf tournament. Created havoc, right? Ruined greens, ruined properties, ruined roads, caused a lot of damage. There was no immediate threat to life, health, property, safety. However, there was an exigency because if Augusta didn't get the contractors in really, really quickly to address all this damage, they were not going to be able to host that golf tournament. And that was going to have a serious effect on their economy for the whole year. Their budget was gonna be null. If they don't do this tournament, their whole year is messed up. And so that's an exigency circumstance. Another example of an exigency circumstance is, for example, schooling. You need to get kids back in school really quickly. And so you're gonna do whatever you can to make sure that you're either bringing in portables, repairing the school so that kids can go to school. That's an exigency. Does that make sense?
So who decides, like from a funding standpoint, if it qualifies for an exigency?
You just, so the agency that is conducting the work makes the determination of whether an exigency or an emergency exists. You're just going to have to document the basis for that determination. So FEMA's not gonna come in and say, yes, this is an emergency. No, it's because if it's a true emergency, you don't have the time for us to come in and do it anyway, right? You have to make that determination. The thing that the government asks is, after the fact, if we're reviewing documents, that you have the documentation that formed the basis of that determination, right? And that documentation can vary. You can archive newspaper articles. You can take photographs. You can have memos to files, emails. In Hurricane Maria, I was involved with, that the electric power grid in Puerto Rico got severely damaged from Maria. And so there were Cobra and Whitefish contracts. And some of the ways that they were justifying is through text messages, because there was no other way to communicate. So it's like, what were the leadership using? What was the communication that they were using to justify and to make that decision? Because it's your leadership, your officials that are going to have to make that decision. And it could be that the only way that they had to communicate at that point in time, and the only way that they were receiving information was through text messages.
Okay.
So whatever you can do to document that.
Is it an online question?
Yep.
If purchases from a company such as Home Depot can be made in person or online, the cost of the product at the store is more expensive than the online price. Does this count as two quotes or one, even though it is the same company? My hunch is it counts as one quote. So same store, two different costs.
So I have never gotten that question. Do you have any answer?
I mean, it's, first of all, if there's an online price at Home Depot, I'm pretty sure they'll honor that in the store. Second of all, if it's from the same place, it's probably gonna be considered one quote. And third of all, to go along with Jay's point, we do have a go stay contract with Home Depot, I believe. So you could, hopefully you would try to get the online or the cheaper price, but you can use Home Depot without getting their bid.
Thanks. All right. The fourth one is inadequate competition. And for this one, you're gonna have to prove that there was inadequate competition. You can't just say, there was inadequate competition, so I just gave it to so-and-so. It's, you tried to go up for bid, you tried to get quotes, nobody came in, nobody asked, said, hey, I want to bid for this. So you're just like, hey, I know this company that can do it, so I'm just gonna award it to them. So you're gonna have to prove and document that there was inadequate competition, and it can't just be a statement without any kind of action that went beyond trying to actually get some qualified contractors to bid on the work. So what would be sufficient documentation for that? It's gonna depend on the circumstance. So if you, if it's a small, if it's a small purchase, for example, then maybe you did research and the online research, and that's all you could find, and maybe you just Google it or document a file like on this date, I did online research, and I wasn't able to find any adequate competition. However, I know that, or any, adequate competition. However, I know that this vendor has it available, and so I went with this vendor, at least from the federal government side. If it's a larger contract, then it might be going out for bid. Like actually going through the process and nobody bid for the work. And then it was like, well, then I know this company will be doing.
Another way is just actually emailing vendors and having them respond to you saying, we don't do that. We don't
Exactly.
have that product. That happens quite often.
And we've run into that actually quite often in our more rural areas. So like, where somebody went out for an RFP on, a contract to update their hazard mitigation plan or something like that. And they go out several times and nobody responds at all. And then they're like, well, somebody contacted us, not through that process. That's, they can do that.
Yes.
And that's who they ended up going with, but they had, that documentation of those. Like, I think 2 or 3 different times they went up for RFP and got no response.
That's a perfect example. And it's all based on the circumstances on a case by case basis. Like, do you need to go through out 3 or 4 times? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you need to go out once or twice or once and then maybe do the emails and then reach out directly to folks and you find nobody. And then maybe that's sufficient to go out and sole source. So it's all very much circumstantial. Just use your best judgment. Yes, sir.
Real quick, is there a timing issue? Whenever we go out for bid, whenever the state requires to go out for bid, it's typically $100,000 contract or more. We require an RFI or RFP. Do they have to go out more than once if they don't get adequate response back? From a federal standpoint, FEMA comes in to audit us. This county went out one time to do this project of $150,000. They got one response back. Do they have to? I can't find it in CFR anywhere.
It's in the CFR.
Where they have to go out more than one time.
No, that's one area where
Documentation.
the rules are not prescriptive on that. So the rules don't tell you you have to post for X many days or you have to go out these many times. It's all based on the circumstances, right? So if it's $150,000 contract, which is relatively small in the grand scheme of things.
From a vet standpoint, it is $150,000 for us.
Right.
Is over our limit.
So, that's where you're using your judgment, best, right? So it's documenting why you think it was adequate. And honestly, if you have the documentation and you made a reasonable assumption and you tried, the likelihood is that, nobody's gonna come to get you. If you didn't do it at all and you went to so-and-so, then that might get you an issue. And why I brought up the cost is because obviously with the larger the cost, the more scrutiny you're gonna get because the more taxpayer dollars that are at stake. So if you have, it's not $150,000 contract, but it's a $5 million contract, maybe you should have tried a little bit harder, right? So that's why it's on a case by case basis, depending on what it is, maybe not. But that's where maybe if the work is very specialized, maybe it's just one. Even though it's a $5 million contract, if the work is very general kind of, engineering work, then maybe you could have gone a second time. So again, but it's the documentation and it's a reasonable performance standard.
Who will determine that reasonableness?
You would.
Okay, that's where I'm going.
You will. So you will document that was reasonable, right? And that you took the steps and why you made, because that's where, FEMA provides you the guidance. You're the ones who are the decision makers here. You just have to document the basis for your decision and make sure that you have done your due diligence and made a good faith effort to comply with these rules and to follow the rules. Document. Okay, number 5, awarding agency or pass-through entity approval. This is one of the exceptions where it says that, for example, FEMA or, the recipient agency in Nevada could approve a sole sourcing. I have never in 10 years at FEMA, I've never seen this be the case. It's kind of like a unicorn. I've never seen FEMA approve sole sourcing. And I haven't seen an occasion where a pass-through entity, a recipient has approved sole sourcing. So this is really like, it's out there, but I haven't seen it come up. Number 4 is continuing work under a sole source contract after public emergency or exigency. So we're going back when we were discussing that emergency and we had the road and we had the debris on the road and we were able to move the debris from the road. And so now people can get to the hospital, right? So now we have a bunch of debris on the side of the road. We can now use the same contract that we used to move the debris out of the road to then move that debris to a central location because there's no longer an immediate threat to public health, life, safety, property, right? So there's no longer like, you gotta act now because if you don't, something bad's gonna happen. Same thing with an emergency. So the thing is that if you do sole source and you're using an emergency or exigency circumstance to justify your sole sourcing, as you're doing it, you have to very quickly switch gears and start the process to put things out for bid. Because if you're gonna need to continue doing work after that emergency or exigency has ended, you're gonna have to transition to some other kind of contract very quickly. Number 5, not making and documenting all efforts to take socioeconomic affirmative steps. Again, this is one that now applies to state and non-state entities. Anything prior to November 2020, state entities don't have to comply, but non-state entities do have to comply. The goal is to assure that these types of firms have access to the competition now that you award it to these firms. Okay, just want to make that clear. The target firms are going to be small businesses, minority businesses, women's business enterprises, and labor surplus area firms. These are the 6 steps, and so these are the 6 steps we were talking about of how do you ensure that you're doing this. So the first one is placing qualified target firms on solicitation lists. So if you're doing your due diligence and before an event happens or before you need X amount of work, this is the list of contractors who could potentially do this work. Just as you're putting together that list that you might reach out to, make sure that some of these firms are included in that list. Then once you have that list, assure that you're actually reaching out to those firms when you're actually needing the work, right? Number 3 and number 4, you see the when feasible language. So you're going to want to divide the requirements when feasible into smaller tasks or quantities. The reason why this is let's say I have a big project that's going to take 2 years. And again, that difference between the cost of price analysis. And I want a company that can do all of the work, right? I don't want to separate the work into 5 different pieces. But the thing is, sometimes if you do, that might allow the smaller companies or women-owned companies to actually come in and say, you know what, I can't do the whole, but I can do a piece of this. And so I might actually be able to enter into the competition and do some of the work and get a piece of the pie. That's when feasible. So again, you don't have to do this, but if it's feasible to break up the work, you should do it. Likewise, delivery schedules when feasible. Also, it allows to break down the scope of work to maybe allow these firms that might not have the resources or larger firms to actually enter into the competition where, you know what, I want all of this in 1 year, but maybe you can break up the schedule and say, well, I need phase 1 this first 6 months, and I need phase 2 the following 6 months, and then we can cover phase 3 the last 3 months. That might allow the smaller company to map out what the work might be to maybe get subcontractors to be able to compete in the work. Again, when feasible. Number 5 is use the services and assistance of the Small Business Administration and the Minority Business Development Agency. And this is just go to their website. They have listings of some of these target firms on their website, and so you can access those firms, you can put it in your file. You can email your local SBA contact, say, hey, I might be doing this type of work, and you help me. And just document that email, put it in your file. You've done this step. And then number 6 is that you're gonna, if you have a prime contractor, and you know that prime contractor is gonna require subcontractors. That prime contractor is going to have to ensure that its subcontractors are also following the previous 5 steps.
And if we've got our prime contractor in place, that this is kind of a statement. If we've got our prime contractor in place and we've got our contract in place, our contract will include all of these requirements.
Mhm.
So we can rely on that.
You can. So a lot of times with this number 6 is if you put that, and there is a, remember I talked about the contract provisions template, there is a provision where if you plug this into your contract, that is now requiring your prime contractor to take these steps. They're now required to do that. You've done your part. So again, the goal here is not to grant the award to these businesses, but to allow them the opportunity to compete.
But just putting out a bid that's open to anyone doesn't comply with this, because we're not essentially assuring that they're solicited. So how do we do that without making it seem unfair to someone else because they're not being solicited?
Yeah, so placing the bid out there by itself and not doing any of these things is not going to comply with the socioeconomic steps. The first one's fairly easy if you're gonna, especially for smaller contracts, and again, only speaking with from the federal government, but if you have anything that's under the small purchase threshold, which is 250,000, you have to get an adequate amount of bids.
Right.
And so you're reaching out to those and you're able to access them. For the bigger ones, it's you can put it out on like on a newspaper, but then you can also reach out and send us blast email to the contractors that you might have, and if that blast email includes some of these firms, you're complying with that, right?
Just, hey, FYI, this is out to bid.
This is out to bid. I just wanted to share that's a way to, the number 3 and number 4 again are when feasible, you're going to document internally if that's feasible, and if not, it's not. Number 5 is just an email to SBA or a printout of what SBA says might be local firms that are in that area.
Okay.
And number 6 is the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Is that target firms a suggested list because it doesn't have veterans on there, it doesn't have people with disabilities? There's other groups that you could say, well, I'm meeting the intent behind this by hitting some other groups. To me, it seems like a suggested group and not truly catching a bunch of the other socioeconomic paths that could be looked at as well.
Yes, that's a very good observation. So these are the target firms that are listed in this regulation, and these are the ones that are used as target firms.
So state of Nevada defines something else, say, and we target a couple other.
I think that's gonna work. I think if you're targeting more, and if you're including within that list of target firms, ones that are not included in that list, that's gonna be even better. So nobody's gonna have to question that or say that wasn't good.
Or we left one off and added 3 more, or whatever that may be.
I think, and again, this isn't like you must include all of these, but when you read the steps, it's like make your best efforts, and maybe there aren't any women-owned businesses that do the scope of work that you want to, and so you don't include them because there aren't any, but there is a veteran-owned company that does do it, and so I'm including them. So I think if you justify it, it's never going to be bad.
Do we need to document the fact that there are no women's businesses that are doing that? And that we subsequently included 3 other veterans-owned businesses.
Yeah, you should, but that could be a line in an email or a line in your file. It doesn't have to be like a whole
That's-
memo to file.
So I'm emailing the SBA right now, and so I just say I'm looking for a list of engineering firms that meet the socio-economic affirmative steps. Can you send them to me? Then
They should be able to respond and just log that and they're saying like, you know what, we don't have any available, or they point you in another direction. You put that in the file because you've done that step.
Okay, great.
Yay, all right, good. Number 6, awarding a time and materials contract without a ceiling price or proper justification. You're allowed. This is a fun topic. So a time and materials contract is one where you have direct labor hours that are charged at fixed hourly rates. So this is the type of labor that I need. It's going to be at $50 per hour, $60 per hour, $35 per hour. And then the actual cost of material. And it's not like a fixed firm price contract, right? So it's like, no, you need to do this work like the roof, right? I need the new roof. We're contracting you for $50,000. I don't really care how many hours it takes or what supplies you bring. It's going to be $50,000. This is more based on the hourly rate of the type of labor that you're needing and the actual cost of materials. You can use this only when it's not possible to estimate the scope of the work. So again, with our roof, you kind of can estimate, and the contractor should have a pretty good idea of what it takes to do a roof, and so you can do a firm fixed price contract. With some contracts, because the scope is not known, maybe it's exploratory, maybe it's something that's novel that hasn't been designed before. Maybe you're doing debris. This comes up a lot with debris, right? We don't know how much debris is out there. We need to get it out there. So I'm going to use the time and materials contract. And then no other contract type is suitable. That's when you can use it. If you're going to use the time and materials contract, the requirements are that you include a ceiling price. Why? It's because, again, you're protecting taxpayer dollars. You have just the hourly rate plus supplies, then potentially the contractor could be like, you know what, I could charge you 100 hours for this, but I'm actually going to charge you 150 because why not? There's no ceiling price, right? So the cost can really climb up on you, and there's very little oversight or ability for you to check that total cost and protect those taxpayer dollars. So you want a ceiling price, like, yes, we don't know how much. Yes, you're allowed to use hourly labor, and we're going to figure it out, but you can't go above 200,000. That's the ceiling. Because of the work that is, you're going to have to maintain a high level of oversight. So you're going to have to be checking that the work is, give me spreadsheets, let me know what they're accomplishing with those hours. So again, the level of oversight is going to have to be a little bit higher because you have less control over the amount of hours that are being charged. And then you only use until the scope of work becomes clear. With the debris operation, for example, at the very beginning after a disaster, you don't know how much debris is out there. You just need to get the contractors out there to start doing the work. After about a couple of weeks, you have a better idea. This is the amount of debris that we have. We can now start negotiating a different type of contract. So I'm not just working off of the hourly rate. And that's only because there's more risk with the hourly rate as opposed to something else that you've negotiated, just a flat amount. Number 7 is awarding a cost plus percentage of cost contract, which is a mouthful. This one is just a no-go, whereas time and materials contract are allowable under certain circumstances. A cost plus percentage of cost contract isn't, because a cost plus percentage of cost contract is where the scope of work and how much is uncertain. So how much the contractor is going to spend and is going to charge you is uncertain. And then the profit that the contractor is going to make is based on that uncertain amount of work. What happens when you have an uncertain amount of work and the profit that the contractor is going to make based on that uncertain? The contractor has every incentive to drive up those prices. Why wouldn't they? Even if they're just a very good person, they're in a business to make money. It's just inherent that you're gonna have that incentive. And so we want to avoid that incentive to not drive up costs when there is uncertainty. Yes.
Have we actually ever seen plus percentage contract?
I have.
You have.
Yes.
Here in Nevada and California, I've never seen one.
I haven't seen them out here. I've seen them in some of, and again, these do come up. They're more related to disasters. It's not so much like steady state mitigation type work. But I've seen them tied to disaster hurricanes.
people wanting to take advantage of a situation.
Exactly. And for example, in Florida with Hurricane Michael a few years ago, there was a situation where there was so high demand, and I think Harvey, Irma, Maria, him had just happened as well, and so they were gouging and they were taking advantage of local governments and charging them whatever they want because nobody could get debris companies out there, and so the debris companies just completely took advantage of that. And that's typically where you have situations where if you don't have somebody who is aware, they can take advantage of that well-meaning local government official. And then we'll to
All right, rolling into number 8, not including the required contract clauses. So this is a requirement for both state and non-state entities, and it's one of the most common non-compliance findings. So the good news is we have the contract provisions guide, and you can find this on the PDAT website. It will tell you which provisions to use and when. And then there is also sample language that you can copy and paste into your own contracts. And number 9, awarding to contractors who are suspended or debarred. So contracts should only be awarded to responsible contractors who can do the job well within the terms and conditions. So with your contractors, look at their past performance, consider their integrity. Are they reputable? Do they have good references of like good jobs that they have done in the past? Or did they just come about when the disaster hit? So you definitely want to do your due diligence with your contractors. Also, are they compliant with public policy? You want to make sure that they, there's no discriminatory practices or something that would, be a public policy issue. And then, do they have adequate financial and technical resources to finish the job? I've seen with a couple of public assistance instances where the contractor that was selected perfectly reputable, but they didn't necessarily have the adequate resources. And this came down to some accounting procedures where things weren't correctly itemized. Again, the contractor, didn't intentionally not follow accounting procedures, but they just didn't have the technical resources. And in these particular cases, when things weren't itemized, costs were then questioned, and then some cases, costs were disallowed. So we don't want this. And, ultimately you want to do your due diligence as if you were spending your own money. So after you determine that the contractor is responsible, you want to go to sam.gov and make sure that the contractor does not appear on the list of contractors who've been excluded from doing federally funded work. So you can find this list on sam.gov. It's a long list, and you cannot award contracts to contractors who are on this naughty list. So make sure that you check this list and then document that you did this, right? Because even if you get lucky and the contractor is perfectly responsible and they aren't on this list, it could still be a finding if you can't demonstrate that you did this step. So make sure you document this. Unfortunately, fraud does happen, particularly the high profile nature of disasters can make communities that are involved targets for fraud. So if you see something, say something. You can report fraud or suspicious activity by phone, by email, or through websites, through all of these contacts. And these can be found on the PDAT website. Make sure you're sharing this information with your subrecipients too, both in your guidance documents and in trainings, because, if you do come across fraud or suspicious activity, want to make sure we document it so other people don't fall victim to it. And then the last one, number 10 in our top 10 mistakes for procurement under a FEMA award is not documenting all of the steps of the procurement. So document. You want to make sure that you're maintaining all of the history of the procurement, so that you can go back and demonstrate that you did all of these steps. Particularly why you chose the particular method for each procurement, including any justification for a non-competitive proposal type. Why you selected the types of contract used, why you selected or rejected a particular contractor, that the contractor is responsible and that they are not on the SAM.gov naughty list. And then the basis for the contract price. So that would include a cost or price analysis for anything that is above $250,000. Yeah. And, with your emails, particularly if you have staff turnover, one of the things that we found is, you want to make sure that you're saving that email that documents that you sent that email to the SBA asking about socioeconomic contracting on your shared drive so that colleagues who come after you then have that documentation.
Tools and resources. So the procurement rules online, this is the website that I was referencing, the ECFR. That's the one that gives you the date, and you can quickly pop in the date of your award, your disaster, and it'll spit out the rules that are applicable to that award or that disaster. So you don't have to guess at it because can be challenging. PDAT website, www.fema.gov/grant/procurement. There you're gonna have that contract provisions template, which is super useful. They have webinars that are available. They have fact sheets, they have checklists, they have the PDAT guide, so the procurement guide. There's lots of information out there that you can access that's related to this. And then again, that naughty list, the contractor responsibility, www.sam.gov. One note on this is you want to make sure that they're not on the list. It could be that a contractor you're using has never registered with SAM.gov. That doesn't mean you cannot use that contractor. What it means is though you have to make sure that the contractor is not on the naughty list, right? So and if they're not on the naughty or they're never registered in SAM.gov, a way to kind of document responsibility is go to the Better Business Bureau website. Do they have any complaints? Do they have an A+? Do they have a D-? Right? That might be also just a good hint not to use them. Look at reviews, look at do references. So not every contractor though is going to be on SAM.gov registered necessarily.
So is it not a requirement that they have to be registered then for FEMA stuff?
For some of the smaller contract stuff, I don't think so. So if you have a small contract, I don't think that they will need to be registered in SAM.gov always.
Okay.
So
We've run into a lot of problems just with not specifically FEMA funding, but other federal funding where they have to be registered and then they get subcontractors and the subcontractors show up on the job and they're not registered and it becomes this whole cascading effect that's, so anyway, I don't know, we're working through that and trying to figure out if there's a certain price threshold where, if the sub's on the job and it's below $10,000, do they really, but.
I think for the smaller stuff, it doesn't really, because you're not, especially if you're opening it up to some of the minority small women-owned businesses like they're doing equity and making sure that the access is there. They're not always going to be. Let me double check on that because now you're going to pause. Well, the federal agencies require it. So, but I think generally not every contractor is going to be registered with big things. You want to make sure that they're not on the naughty list, that they're not in the list of excluded, disbarred contractors.
If anything, sometimes like all these requirements, like you have to be registered, the smaller companies are like, I don't want to deal with it, forget it.
And that's a barrier to access. Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
Whereas we have the same thing, but we just walk them through it and help them get registered.
Yeah.
But
And it's an easy process, I think, to get registered. Our contact information for Heather and me, we're certainly available to answer any questions that you might have, but then also, reach out to Janelle if you don't have our contact information, if you have a question, she's your central POC, and she can always reach out to us if she needs additional technical assistance in addressing a question. And with that, we're done. Sorry we took longer than anticipated, but thank you for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Okay.
You need more?
No, it's not, yes. Oh, John.
If you grab.
I've learned my lesson.
Oh, well, there is a microwave to warm up and we could just let me know.
Yes.
Not that. Because they give me. So the guy. Room 9. This morning he started going out.
Yeah.
My computer is always playing on the meeting, but.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks. Thanks, Jared. You might need to share your screen.
Do this time tomorrow.
Yeah.
My computer's here. We're going. We join another.
We are supposed to, so I'd say just share your time with me. I don't know anything about it. My stress and experience.
Yeah.
So you're gonna do.
Share my.
Okay, so
So what do you guys did? What you guys do?
how long were we went, she sent me her slides here, then we're.
About a year.
My dad got some.
Yeah, so.
Okay, so let's, I know, I said if you would want to set up your computer to that, then we need HDMI. I'm hoping that.
I worked in that.
So let's,
I'm just learning the whole landscape.
HDMI cable, so I think you're gonna bring it all the way over here. And
I've been like a door.
yeah, there is a, well, there is a plug back here, yeah, actually there is, yeah, there's a, wall there.
So we're violating like 20.
Yeah.
And for me, like.
There's a lot of.
Yeah.
As long as I would.
So.
Maybe we'll do stuff.
Oh, yeah, that would be kind of. Thank you so much. So I'm gonna put this one here. Are people gonna be able to see the slides?
Yeah, because. Well, I hope, I don't know.
Okay, so let's try it. So- Whose screen is there now?
That's mine, that's mine.
Okay, so HDMI. How do I go to the meeting? Is it the same one again?
Yeah, I didn't even log in, so we should be in.
I'm waiting on. I feel like.
Oh, this is not.
So which one is this one? Mr. May?
Yeah.
Save the meeting, please try again. Okay.
I think he's
Okay.
doing just fine.
I don't know. Oh, I have the 10 miles.
Take a minute. Okay, so I'll turn all my mic and stuff like that off. Your computer for that? Okay, I'm in queue now to get into the call.
Okay.
I think.
That one. Yeah, about this,
But now the wife.
Give two of these.
That is the right one. If you go to the people.
Hold on, start over.
Start over. All right, we're starting back, you guys. Thanks for coming back from the break. We are going into the benefit cost analysis or BCA portion. We're very honored to have Saroj here to present for that. He is, if you get those nasty questions on your BCA, it's his fault. No, not really. It might be his fault, but it might be somebody else's fault. Anyway, we all know that FEMA is looking at our BCA's a little bit more in depth now. And you're seeing these requests for information come back on your BCA's. And so I was really happy to be able to add this into this because it's not, I'm certainly not the expert. I've had one day of a 3-day training because it happened during a disaster period. But I'm gonna turn this over to Saroj and wow us with your BCA information. We'll all get out of here as experts on doing our BCA. Take it away.
Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. My name is Saroj Bhandari, and I am the BCA specialist and civil engineer by trade. I started in Region IX in December earlier this year, and yeah, happy to be here. Before I get started, I kind of want to just get a check on some of you guys in the room. You know, when does FEMA require us to do BCA? Do you guys know if it's non-disaster project or disaster grants or non-disaster grant? Does anybody have an idea? No idea? Okay, let me kind of like, can I use this board? Is that okay? Yeah, I'll just use this board with a marker. So there's typically like disaster and then non-disaster, right? So disaster side is commonly when BCA kicks in is a grant called 406, which is done by PA, Public Assistance, right? And then 404, which is the HMGP. I think this might ring some bell, right? And then for non-disaster, there's the BRIC and FMA, right? Does that make sense? So my role as a civil engineer with Region IX, I'm on the non-disaster side, right? But it's kind of irrelevant as far as BCA, because BCA for a project, benefit is benefit, cost is cost, right? So there is not so much distinction, but at least my position in Region IX is on the non-disaster side. I kind of want to just like get the framework going so that we're all on the same page. So what exactly is this presentation? This presentation is designed to be an overview of the BCA. You know, kind of similar to what Angie had mentioned earlier, you know, you won't be walking out from this presentation as an expert, but you will, yeah, maybe like, you know, down the years, if I were, you know, invited back and do more presentation, that's the hope, right? But this today, my hope is to at least show you guys, you know, what exactly is BC on a fundamental level, right? And really broaden our understanding from there. And we're also going to talk about a summary of commonly required input information and why it's needed. And it's supposed to be non-technical in nature, so you don't have to be an engineer to, you know, stay and follow along in my presentation. That's my hope. Okay, so please don't get discouraged. Please ask a lot of questions. It might get very tedious, and sometimes, like, you know, you might be losing focus or something. You know, always ask me questions if that's needed. Okay. But this presentation is not designed to override any sort of FEMA guidance or directives. It's not a formal BCA training of any kind, or it's not supposed to be inclusive. Okay. So by the end of this presentation, you should be able to take home these information. And starting with, if you are going to be performing BCA for projects, you know where to locate the resources, right? Where do I find the resources to perform an adequate benefit cost analysis? All right. And I'll go over this extensively. Describe what exactly is BCA, right? Why does FEMA tell you to do a BCA, right? What's the point? Why is it a requirement? We're also gonna go through a generator example. So we're gonna dive in even deeper and use a toolkit and walk through a generator example, okay? And then there are something called pre-calculated benefits. Have you guys heard of that before? Anybody in the room? So pre-calculated benefits is basically FEMA saying, okay, you don't want to do BCA, here's some plug and chug, right? Here's some already calculated benefits for these sort of projects that qualify. And you can essentially just utilize that and not even have to perform a BCA. Right? It's like a shortcut. You're trying to, roundabout the BCA. If that makes sense. And we'll walk over this. And then lastly, we're going to talk about alternative cost methodology. And again, this is only applicable. Alternative cost methodology is only applicable for non-disaster, right? Really, really important to make that distinction. All right, so let's start with resources. So number one resource that's available for you while you're performing your BCA. Oh, is there some questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just answering your question.
Okay, great. Thank you. So number one resource that's available for you is what I like to call is this blue icon. When you're actually on the BCA calculator, how many can I see with the raise of hands? How many of you guys have reviewed a BCA in the past?
It's a while back.
Okay. How many of you guys have actually utilized the FEMA approved calculator with Excel before for your projects? Okay, that's okay. And if you haven't, that's also okay, right? I don't want you to feel like because you haven't done that, it's like bad or something. It's not, right? But when you are using the FEMA approved BCA calculator, there's this little blue icon. And when you click on this, it kind of explains exactly what sort of information you need to put in. And I would say this is the number one go-to, even as a BCA specialist that I utilize, right? So for example, in here, there's project title, and then property location, structure type, hazard type. And when you go into mitigation type, if I click on the mitigation type, for example, this another screenshot pops up. And it kind of explains what mitigation, what treatment are you utilizing to perform a BCA for your hazard, right? That's the number one resource. Number two are these two documents. I also actually printed them out. These are my copy. So these documents are kind of old. The first one that came out was in 2009. It's the BCA reference guide. It kind of gives you a broad overview of what are all the values that you're putting in the BCA calculator that's FEMA approved, right? And one of the things I would say from my experience, that's the least utilized is the Appendix A, where it goes over all the sort of different hazards and projects that you're undertaking, right? And what information do you need to put in? What backup information, documentation you need to put in for the BC to go through, so that when we review the projects, we're not RFIing and sending you more questions, right? Right? So that Appendix A is so important from this document. There's also a supplement guide that came out a few years afterwards. Okay, and these two documents are really, really, I would say the first step I would start when you're performing your BCA, because it's going to really explain to you what information you need to put in, what documentation is FEMA seeking. Does that make sense? There's also something called job aids that FEMA likes to put out for various sort of different projects that needs technical information. So there's some job aids that I sort of listed here, but there's many more, right? And these sort of documents are, again, super important when you're doing your BCA, because you will know what information you need to provide to FEMA to be adequate, right? So that we don't do RFIs. I can't emphasize that enough. So the second thing that is very, very important is the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program and Policy Guide. This thing is maybe 600 and something odd pages long. It encompasses all of mitigation program in this book. So if you're planning on applying for mitigation funds in the future, or you are now, this document is the cornerstone. This is the, this is it document, right? There was a new one that published in March of 23. So anything, so if you have a disaster that happened before that, you would use the older version of 2015 HMA guide. But if it's after that date, you'd use 2023. Okay. And as I'm going through my presentation today, I'm also going to be referencing you the specific sections of this guide. Okay, so some of my presentation, they're like a high level presentation, right? Like it's kind of a zoomed out version. So if you want to like kind of dive in a little bit deeper, what counts as benefits, what are this type of projects, right? I will pinpoint to you exactly what section to look at. Does that make sense? So again, this document is so important. I would highly recommend downloading it. It's very easy to download. You can literally go to Google and type this in. And it is a little bit intimidating, but as you are working with more FEMA projects and FEMA grants, you're going to get more used to this document, right? And then the last resource that you have available in your disposal is the BCA helpline. BCA helpline has a number and an email. Sometimes when you're performing your BCA, you might be stuck in a very specific situation, right? This is a great tool to utilize and seek guidance as to what's next for your project, right? And I highly recommend emailing them over calling, because if you email them, they might give you some guidance, and then you can use that email correspondence as part of your project documentation, so that when we're reviewing that project, we know exactly where it got the information from, right? Does that make sense? So let's kind of dive into what benefit cost analysis is, okay? So let's assume that we're all gonna go to lunch from here to the nearest McDonald's, and there's few routes to do that, right? There's one you can take the highway, there's one that you can take the road, and benefit cost analysis is evaluating different options and making a decision that works best for you, right? You determine what the benefit is for you. So maybe you want to go there very quickly because you have limited time, right? Maybe you want to not go on a highway because you might not like a lot of high speed, right? So you're always making those decisions in your head as you're going about doing errands and all that kind of stuff. So even when you're making decisions for lunch, you're doing a benefit cost analysis in your head, right? And Cornell, kind of fun fact, Cornell estimates that we make roughly 226 decisions just on foods every day. So why do we do benefit cost analysis? We do it because the Stanford Act said so, right? We must do this. Why? Because it's taxpayers' dollars. We have to make sure the taxpayers' dollars are spent adequately, right? With the best of its possible way, right? And also because the executive branch code 44 and the OMB circular 894 tells us to do exactly how. Okay. Again, we do benefit cost analysis to set priorities. Is the project good investment? It allows us to determine if the project is actually a good investment or not. And ultimately, it's going to safeguard taxpayers' dollars, right? We want to make sure, we're spending the taxpayers' dollars the best possible way, right? Does that make sense? Any questions? So what exactly is benefit cost analysis? It's a process of quantifying the advantages, which is benefit, and then comparing to the drawbacks, which are the costs. And as you can see here in the scale, the benefit outweighs the cost, right? So now that we know what benefit cost analysis is, there's something called benefit cost ratio, BCR. And for a project to be viable, right? For a project to be worth, from the federal government's perspective, worth or warrant federal dollars, the benefit has to at least match. So even on the scale, if the scale was even, that's okay, right? Because then that would be 0 or that would be 1, right? But if it's over, that's even better. That means the benefit clearly outweighs the cost. That means that project warrants. Does that make sense? So essentially, benefit, you would get a benefit cost ratio by dividing the benefit with cost, and it has to be 1.0 or more. All right. So what are considered benefits? Benefits are future loss prevented or reduced by a mitigation project. So that means if you're implementing a project, benefits are all sort of damages or losses that you're preventing by implementing that project. Does that make sense? And the benefit calculated in the BCA are the values of damage that will be avoided as a result of the project. So let's go over what they are, right? So physical damage is something that is inherently there. So if you're doing a project and you're preventing physical damage, that counts as the benefit in the benefit cost analysis, right? Loss of service or function. So if you have a power outage or a drinking water being stopped, so these are loss of function, right? Or even a bridge toll that gets stopped, right? And so on. Again, these things, you want to document them so that you can really quantify what is the benefit, right? What is the specific loss of function, right? A 1-day power outage into 100 neighborhoods, for example, you can equate that, right? 1 day, how many electricity usage is being used each houses every single day, right? And if there's 100 houses and the power outage was for 1 day, you can come to a specific number, right? And if your project is going to allow us to prevent that from the future from happening, right? That's a very specific benefit we can get to, right? But again, documentation is really, really important for all this, right? Injury or death, displacement cost, which is essentially, if folks have to move out of their homes and have to live in a hotel or shelters and things like that. Emergency management costs. So this is very, very specific. So this is saying that if there was a disaster and by having a project in place, the next disaster management cost is going to be eliminated, right? That's a very specific benefit. Maintenance costs. So if the infrastructure that is getting mitigated, the maintenance cost is less than how it is now, right? There's a clear distinction between the maintenance to keep up now versus maintenance to keep up with the newer infrastructure, right? NFIP administration costs. So this is specific to flood. Volunteer labor. Social benefits and ecosystem service benefits. So these two are fairly new in FEMA. In the past, these two were only allowed to use once your benefit cost ratio was 0.7 and 0.75 and over. That is not the case anymore. That's something they've waived. And if you want to kind of like know exactly what counts as benefits, these are all listed in the part 5 of C.1.1 of the mitigation HMA guide. Okay, so in there it kind of allows. Yeah, of course. C.1.1. Yep, part 5. Okay, and it's titled project benefits. So in there it kind of like elaborates even more to specific benefits I listed here. I will dive into the social benefits a little bit because these are new. Social benefits captures the avoided costs associated with mental stress, anxiety, and loss of wage. So, and these are only projects that protect residential structures. So these are very specific projects that you're working with, right? So this is not all across the board. It's only specifically for residential structures. And again, like I said, projects no longer need to be 0.75 standard BCR before social benefits can be captured. Yes.
Social benefits to the residential structures, it has to be directly impacting those homes, right?
Yes,
Not
right.
like an indirect.
Yeah.
So with a flood situation,
Mhm.
it can't be like something downstream, or I don't know, how does that work out? Like,
Yeah. So the mitigation project would have to encompass residential structures. Yeah. So I guess technically flood would work
okay,
if you're mitigating a project in a residential area. Sure. I don't see why I
all
wouldn't.
those homes
Yeah.
would be-
Any other questions? Okay. So social benefits, we just talked about. So ecosystem service benefits include projects that preserve or improve the natural environment. So I'm sure you guys have heard, nature-based solution a lot in a lot of mitigation projects, right? So FEMA is really like, pushing for projects such as those, right? And that includes on the benefit cost analysis side of the house too. So this is something that we're constantly making progress and making benefits be shown appropriately for ecosystem service through particularly for nature-based solution projects. Okay, so those projects include acquisitions, relocations, floodplain, stream, or coastal restorations. And these are sort of like the specific benefits that the BCA calculator calculates for different land use. And again, this benefit was only allowed to be used before when you had already hit the 0.75 marks. That's not the case anymore, right? So again, the BCA toolkit is really expanding on the social benefits and ecosystem service benefits. So what are considered not benefits?
Quick
And
question.
yes.
So just so I understand this correctly,
Mhm.
say Carson City has, say, 100 acres of open space and then has 20 acres of rural open space, then it would have 100 and you would multiply those by that, and that would give you that value.
Right. So I think in there it lists like the old land use and then the new land use. So it would be the difference between the two. Yep,
Right, between the old land use and the new.
correct. So the improvements with the old one, and again, this is particular to these projects, right?
Okay.
So it's not all across all the mitigation projects. Does that make sense?
Well, so I guess I ask a question, so does it have to be a mapped flood insurance rate map to be the floodplain, or does like alluvial plain floodplains count?
I'm not entirely sure. I think floodplain as a whole would work, is my gut reaction to that. But I can get back to you. Any other questions? All right, so what are not benefits? So benefits, any losses that are not directly impacted by the proposed project may not be counted. Again, kind of what Heather was asking earlier, about being a direct, you have to be able to make that direct connection, right, for the benefit to be captured. Does that make sense? So anything that is subjective or not quantifiable cannot be counted as benefits, such as ease of project or aesthetic values, right? And I think one of the things that I had a question asked earlier privately was about legal fees, and this part the OMB Circular A95 dictates that indirect benefits cannot be considered. For example, changes in gross regional economic product, income, or employment, or avoided criminal justice system costs for disaster-related crimes. Right? So these things are not considered benefits. So this is kind of what the BCA tool. Oh, there's a little lag. This is what the where you would find the actual BCA toolkit. You would go to the FEMA website under benefit cost analysis page, and then you would click on this little blue icon with the download icon over here. And then the way it works is that you basically load that tool in your Excel file. Okay. And an Excel file provides a link to the web-based calculator. So it's essentially the BCA toolkit is essentially an add-on to your Excel in your computer. But that add-on is something that is constantly getting updated by FEMA. So it's like an online calculator is what that is. All right. And then you would use that calculator and you would print that in PDF. That's really, really important steps, because if you perform the same exact BCA from now until, like, let's say next year, all of the updates that FEMA does on the online will be entirely different. Your results will be entirely different. So it's so important for you to print that in the PDF version while you're performing your BCA for your specific project. Right? Because the online calculator is getting improved often, periodically by FEMA. And then closing the web interface downloads data and stores it in your Excel file. So that file that you perform your BCA is already saved in your computer only. Right? I know this gets really, really confusing, because every time you know, I've met with folks that have done the BCA using a toolkit, they get very confused. A lot of times they have even a hard time opening the calculator. You know, I don't know if that's true for some of you guys who have actually performed the BCA, right? Sometimes it gets a little foggy, you know, and hairy, and so it's really important to understand how this works. Does this help a little bit? Yeah. Okay. Good. So again, the data is saved locally in your specific file that you're working on. So when you're submitting your project, you can submit the PDF file and also the Excel file, right? Because we want to look at how you performed your BCA, like review your BCA. Okay. Any questions? Very good. So good to hear that. So BCA Toolkits provides a user comments entries, which I'll go over when we go over the generator project. Users are encouraged to submit a written narrative. So really, like, a lot of times, you know, you might be getting a lot of RFI for your BCA portion of your project, is because we are looking at that project with what you're submitting to us, right? We can only see through the documentation that you're providing us. So it's so important to have that narrative. So even if that means when you're submitting your project as a Word file, you kind of narrate that project for us, right? You know, for this portion of the BCA, I assume this, and so on. So that way, when we are reviewing the project, it kind of gives us a clear roadmap of what are your thought process, right? Instead of us trying to really go through it and try to figure it out. Does that make sense? And I'll explain that more, how you can build that narrative specifically in the toolkit. So comments, narratives, and supporting document should explain the approach and methodology, describe and support assumption, cite sources such as studies, models, storm data, etc., and include anything that will support BCA data entry, right? So in other words, documentation. Give us as much backup documentation as you can, so that, you know, we don't have to kind of go back to you again and ask for those things, right? So let's go over how to enter the information in the BCA, and we'll walk through a generator example. Okay, so this is kind of what that calculator looks like when you load it up in your computer. So you opened up Excel, you've downloaded that file from the FEMA website, and that file will essentially just sit here as, and it's going to say add-ins, right? This is what it's going to look like. You click on this, okay? You click on that, and this is what pops up. And then you can click on Open Calculator, and this is what it looks like. All right. And so you're basically at the interface of the calculator. So here you have many options. If you wanna, you know, start your BCA, you want to add projects, and that's what we're trying to do with our generator project. So we'll add it, and this is what that looks like. So it kind of gives you a project configuration with project titles, hazard type, mitigation action type, property type, title, damage and frequency relationship based on, right? So again, that little blue eye thing, that is again #1 resource when you're doing the BCA. It kind of guides you exactly what information you need to put in for each of the sections. So here you're selecting the structure type, and then the hazard type, mitigation, and damage and frequency relationship. All right. So what exactly is damage and frequency relationship? So model damage, which is the first option, is location-specific hazard data, such as flood insurance studies, hurricane winds, tornado or hurricane safe room, wildfire, droughts, or seismic building mitigation projects. You can use this for all these sort of projects. And then for historical data damages, you need to have really good historical damage history from previous events, right? So per the guide, you need at least 3 historical damages for it to be adequate BCA. All right. And then professional expected damage, which is what a lot of folks lean on, is estimated damage by a qualified professional. So this could be, you know, engineering, or someone that basically is someone from professionals who are estimating how much damage is actually going to happen based on the hazard that you're trying to undertake. Does that make sense for your project? So the next section after the project configuration is the cost estimation. Entering the project useful life. It's 19 here because again, we're doing a generator project. So notice how there every single section entry has this little plus icon, right? Can you guys see this? So there, when you're inputting your values, right? One of the things that would make FEMA's life a lot easier is if you're using 19 years, you want to hit plus here. Well, in this case, it's a standard value, so you don't really need to justify, right? You don't need to justify where you got those 19 years. But let's say you're saying it's like 25 years, right? Using that plus icon, it's gonna give you another table to type in the comments, so you can justify why you said 25 years. A lot of times when we're reviewing BCAs, those fields are empty, right? And there's a lot of values that are being put in that doesn't have that narrative or documentation, right? And that becomes the RFI items. Does that make sense? So you really want to, think about what information you're putting in and building that narrative using the features of the calculator. And if need be, like maybe you want to like really elaborate where your value you got the value from, you can always just reference to a document and attach that document onto your FEMA Go or grants manager, wherever you're putting it in, right? So that we can really understand where you're getting those information. And that's all we're seeking for, right? Building a strong narrative is so important. I can't emphasize that enough. So project cost, what counts as project cost or considered initial project cost is construction cost. That's a really big value, right? Design and engineering, legal fees and permitting fees. What are not considered initial costs are reduced tax base or indirect economic losses or transfer payments such as insurance premium. Initial project costs typically match the submitted total project budget, right? So when you're, a lot of times too, like when you're submitting your total project cost in the BCA, which could be different than your total project cost in the application. And you must be wondering why, right? Because management cost is something that you can exclude, right? Because in FEMA, actually, it's kind of from the grants world, which that's not my area of expertise, but I do know that just to manage a grant now, FEMA allows you to have an entire different project, right? Just to manage a project, there's an entire grants for that. But again, if you don't want to include the management cost in your BCA, that's only going to enhance your BCR, right? That's only going to give you more of a bump. Does that make sense? Yes, question?
How do you account for how quickly the cost of things is changing? Like, for instance, putting in a grant application, I'll get an estimate of what things cost. By the time we actually get to do the work, things may have doubled. So how does that affect this benefit cost analysis after the fact?
Yeah, so
You can't plan for the price increase.
yeah, so I can't really speak for the cost side because that's sort of like what you will be submitting to us, right? But from the benefit side, the calculator actually takes that into account. So for example, if you're saying a maintenance cost to upkeep this new project that you implemented is let's say $2,000 every year, and the life cycle of that is 19 years, right? The calculator already assumes it's not going to be 2,000 every year for the next 19 years. It already assumes a certain discount rate or inflations and also those things on the back end that accounts for that on the benefit side. But for the cost side, I think that's something that's the project cost. That when you guys are coming up with the project cost, that's maybe something you can put in as a line item. I'm not really sure, I can't really speak for that.
So basically, we do the BCA, say the BCA is $1 million. And then we next apply for the BRIC grant. And it will be $1 million in the application, but when it comes
The reality,
to actual costs, they're not determined until you put out the RFQ, and maybe then at that point, the RFQ tends to be $2 million. And then at that point, you either have to phase it. Would you have to do another benefit cost analysis if it was double of the amount, or does the benefit cost analysis just let you apply?
I think for the phase project, you would have a condition to perform a benefit cost analysis once you finished your phase and you have the actual cost. So you go back and put in those actual costs. Because when you're before phase one, you sort of assume those costs, right? Right. Best of your abilities. But I think the question that you were wondering was like the increase in the material and all that sort of, like inflation in the market, whatever, That's something I think that's more for a grants world.
I think we might be able to put a line item in your
Yeah.
cost estimate spreadsheet for inflation as 25% or whatever you think it might be.
I think there's a cap though, I think.
Janelle, is that correct?
Yeah, FEMA does allow for a line item for inflation, but I'm not sure what the cap is.
Yeah, I think there's a cap. I want to say it's 5%, but I'm not, again, I'm not a grant specialist.
Well,
But
we know
I can
inflation-
get back to you on that.
It's definitely.
Can you find that in lines of 5%?
10 years ago, that was the average.
No, so I guess what I'm trying to say is like, that's not really benefit cost analysis, right? Like, it's kind of, goes beyond the presentation that we're trying to have, you know?
Right.
So that's more of a grants question, like if the increase in cost of materials and so on happens down the line, that's not something I think BCA captures,
Right.
right? BCA is really focused on what project cost that you're saying it's gonna cost. And we equate it to, these are the benefits, right? And like, what are the benefits?
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it's more hammered on the benefit side
Okay.
than so much on the cost. But I think it's a fair question. Nevertheless, yeah.
Yeah, so come to our application building and we'll get that. I'm gonna put Courtney on the spot because this is your project, but would you ask the question about the lawsuit?
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did?
Well, not publicly.
Oh, okay.
That's good for our benefit. I can outline it if we think it would be helpful.
Yeah.
When we were originally putting together our BCA, we have flood damages from 2 back-to-back years. And that's like the cost incurred to clean it up, right? And then subsequently, the residents filed a lawsuit against the county. And so I directly related to those flood events. So I'm thinking, oh, well, that's a damage as well, right? It's not mud on the road, but it's a monetary damage. But anyways, he covered in here that those don't qualify. I'm not sure why. It seems very logical to me, but legal police.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's my understanding.
Although he's not the one who took it out of here. I don't think you reviewed that earlier.
No, so like I said earlier, like, no, so I look at the non-disaster side of the house. So the project that she's talking about is the HMGP project.
It is a disaster.
Yeah, so, but based on my understanding, if it's legal fees, or, you know, lawsuits, of the kind that you described, they're typically not considered a benefit.
So what about, and maybe they're the same thing, but, what about if they're required to do something, a specific thing as a result of that? So you're not talking about the lawsuit itself, you're talking about the cost of whatever it was that they were required to do as a result of that, you know, lawsuit with those costs be eligible?
So I think it would be like a case by case. So let's say if a lawsuit required everyone to, I don't know, like increase the building code to the latest standard or something like that, right?
We don't talk about building codes in there.
I think that may be warranted. But again, I think that would be particularly seen case by case. Again, but you know, I really want to like not emphasize is like, oh, this works and this doesn't work as from a BCA standpoint. Really, I want you guys to take home the fact that if you build a strong narrative and provide a documentation, you know, I think it's viable, right? We're not going to get in your way, right? As long as you build a strong narrative and submit the documentation to back up your assumption, it should work. Yeah, so there's not like a hard line.
Here's an online question.
Mhm.
I'm just curious if we include transfer payment in identifying benefits and costs, since there's no economic gain from transfer payment. I mean, just for calculating benefits.
Yeah, it says transfer payments are not. Typically, transfer payments are not eligible. for, or not considered, not eligible, not considered benefit. Any other questions? Great questions, by the way. So let's go into the project cost. What are considered maintenance costs? Costs necessary for upkeeping or repair of mitigation projects component, like road maintenance, drainage network inspection, debris removal, landscape maintenance, and other type of site maintenance. So there, it's not just limited to that, right? Maintenance could be anything for the project that you're mitigating. If in doubt, refer to the integrated help with, which includes several notes for consideration. And again, I think we kind of touched on this discount rate. BCA calculator converts future expenses into today's dollar using discount rate.
Is that discount rate based on the Federal Reserve rate?
Yeah, they're standard. So typically they're at 7%, and then there is a time, which I will talk about in the alternative cost methodology, that you can use a different discount rate, which is kind of exciting. Woohoo!
This is exciting.
All right. Yeah. So let's go over this project example. So project title is Generator Example P2A 2023. It's located in Carson City, Nevada. This is the GPS location. A lat and long. Property structure type is a critical facility building. Hazard type is a infrastructure failure, and we're trying to. Our mitigation action is a generator. Can you see? So we're using professional expected damages. And for the cost estimation, we're saying the useful life is 19 years. That's a standard value for generator's life cycle. Initial project cost we're saying is $125,000. And the number of maintenance years is again 19. That's default value. And then the annual maintenance cost that we're saying is going to be $1,200. And the total mitigation cost there is $137,000 and some change. Okay, so you'd hit next. Once you input all this information,
When we like next to each of those things, that's where we do the plus and then talk more about.
yes,
And then we hit next.
that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So again, like some of the default values, for example, you don't really need to explain that, right? Because that's what like BCA calculator designed. It's using a default value. But any sort of like, for example, like you go back here, initial costs, right? 125. You would help if you told us here that's the project total cost, right? Or refer to a document that already outlines the cost estimate or something, right? Really creating that roadmap and narration, right? That helps a lot. But sometimes like it gets like super complex. That the example that I'm doing is a very simple and basic example. I really want to emphasize this. When you go back to your regular job, away from this training, and then you're going to be doing different hazards, this gets really, really complicated. It's gonna seek specific values, which requires significant amount of interagency coordination and documentation. And while I'm at this point, I really want to emphasize on this reference guide document, Appendix A. Please. Appendix A has this table. It's called Data Documentation Templates. Right, and it literally just tells you what information the BCA is asking for, how to build a narrative for it, and also where to source that documentation. What counts as the proper documentation? And it's catered to individual hazards. So if you're working on flooding, it's different. If you're working on seismic, structural is different, non-structural is different, tornado, right? Drought, wildfire. So every single one, that appendix is super helpful. I really want to emphasize That's all you guys can. This,
Yeah.
it's on the FEMA website. I can actually, I'll leave this in the office for you. You can give these.
Okay.
It's right.
I think if we know where to access.
It's the appendix of the first document.
Yeah.
Was 2008.
2009 and 2011.
Do they both have appendices? So this one has the appendix here.
Yep, so that's just the link to that document.
Right. Okay, and then this is
Yep.
part 2.
Yep, so you can literally just go to Google and type in the cover of that document. It'll be available.
So the appendix are page 6. in
Yep.
the notes.
Super helpful.
Okay.
Appendix A of that document,
Right,
of the first document, BCA reference guide.
thank you.
Great question. Very good. So let's go back into the generator example. How's everyone feeling? Still with me?
We're still with you.
Okay, very good. So here we're saying, year built, I should probably have written a year here. But then this defaults, this is a default value. And when you go into critical facility properties, it gives you several options. I think I'm going a little faster here. So let's track back a little bit. On the damage analysis parameters, we're saying the year analysis was conducted was 2023. Year property was built. I really should have filled this in with the year. So that's my mistake. So again, this is what I was talking about. When you go onto this, towards the N plus sign, it gives you this comment table. So when you fill this out, it helps us a lot to really build that narrative. I can't emphasize that enough. Building that narrative, right? And then critical facility properties. In here, it gives you 3 options, which is fire station, hospital, police station, and there is a section for others. If your community identifies a critical facility that's beyond these 3, you can utilize that feature. And this is what the fire station one looks like, but this is what all the other ones looks like, right? So this is for fire station, police station, hospital, and others. For this particular example, we're gonna say it's a fire station. And the population served by this fire station is 29,496. The type of area served by this fire station is urban. And the distance between this fire station and the fire station that provides the fire protection for the geographic area is, in other words, the distance between the 2 fire stations, right, is roughly 14.2 miles. And does this fire station have EMS service, emergency medical service? We're saying yes. And what is the distance in miles between the fire station and the fire station that provide EMS service is 0. And when you input all this information, the calculator automatically calculates the amount of benefit each day with this facility, right? So it basically tries to find out, the need of the generator that we're saying in this project, right? Part of the mitigation. And so this page is essentially saying that these are the damages before mitigation, and this is the damage after the mitigation. Okay, so let's talk about it here. So we're saying the reoccurrence interval of every 5 years, the fire station gets impacted 1 day, right? And then every 48 years, it gets impacted 4 days, and every 181 years, it gets impacted 7 days. And they even quantify that with the benefit. So 1 day is 32,000 and some change, and then 4 days and 48 years is 129 or 130 roughly, and then with 181 years recurrence interval with 7 days impact is 227,000. This is before the mitigation has happened, right? Before the generator is there. Now with the generator project that's in place, we're saying, or this calculator is saying that every 181 years, it's only going to impact one day. And that one day value is 32,000. Right?
So it's impacting one day based on the 181 years, but the life of the generator is only
Right.
19 years.
Yeah. So, but there, it's just calculating the benefits. So they calculate the benefits per day,
Correct.
right? Does that make sense? So in here, you can tell that the generator project does in fact have some benefit, right?
So what kind of documentation do you have to show based on what you input there?
So this one is professionally expected damages. So in here, we're using all of default values. So you don't really have to show anything.
When you say default values, what do you mean? Like, are
So we're saying that you would want to have documentation for these,
right?
right? All this information, I mean, I inputted this information just for the example's sake. It's not based on an actual project, right? So is this an urban area? You would want to tell us it is, right? Because of X, Y, and Z. This is a population count. You would show that. And this is the distance between the two fire stations. You would showcase that. This is where you would really input the information as far as documentation is involved. Okay. I'm going back just so I can tell you. So critical facility, right? If it's a fire station, you don't really need to tell us that. But if it's not, then you would, right? Again, so analysis duration, built year. So if it is not a default value, you would. This is what I mean. So every time it says default value here, if you're using beyond the default value, you would want to explain to us where you got that number from. Does that make sense?
Well, where does the default information come from?
This is based on the, hang on. Yeah, so it's
So the 32498. So if you're gonna on page 36 or slide 36. How did you know all of the like years and dates though? Or no? Yeah, that table and that's, yeah.
which one? I'm sorry.
So on the professional expected damages, it looks like they're grayed out, but how did?
So those are what the calculator is calculating for us.
Oh,
Based on the fire station critical facility information that we input.
gotcha. Oh, so that's a.
Does that make sense?
Okay.
That's
why
the
they're
slide.
compared.
Yeah, so the slide before, this is the value that it counts every day. And then if you go to one day, that's the same value here.
Right.
But then it equates it to different reoccurrence in the morning.
Okay.
I'm gonna get back to your question. Don't think I've forgotten.
Okay.
I know we're like transitioning to different.
Sorry.
No, it's
I think it's kind of where I landed on this is where I'm stuck is how to you're
Document.
like justify your recurrence interval.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't really. They're like, you can do an engineering study to figure it out. And I'm like,
No. So you're.
exactly.
No. Don't make this studies. That's not the point, right? That's the last thing I would want for you guys, right? Because it's too overwhelming and just getting help is too much. And especially if the help is warranted, nothing breaks my heart more than that, right? But your case is entirely different because you're using historical damages. So that one it's very meticulous with the details because you have to provide the historical context, provide the historical documents to tell us where are you basing your recurrence interval from, right? And you and I can again sit like maybe after this presentation and I can show you exactly, I can walk you through the guide. When you're utilizing a historical damages, how can you get to recurrence interval that's reasonable, that FEMA will approve? You know, so maybe I think there's that little gap. Does that make sense? So I will show you that before we go.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay, learn it, Courtney, and we'll all learn it from you.
Any other questions?
I'm always the cross.
No, you're not wrong, child. Please don't do that. Carrying on? Okay. Don't remember where I was. Okay, so we talked about this. So the next tab here kind of like summarizes what we just talked about. So the total standard mitigation benefit is 158,000, right? And your mitigation total cost is 137. So the fact that benefit is already more than your cost, it already hits that threshold that FEMA wants you to hit of 1.0, right? So in this case, we have 1.15 BCR. So this project is in fact sound. This project, this generator is in fact worth investing federal dollar in the eyes of FEMA. Does that make sense?
Are you better off using the standard numbers than trying to figure it
A
out?
lot of times, yeah. And again, the only reason I also want you to know that the only reason I use the standard value is because this makes it a lot easier to explain. You know, how to use a BCA calculator. But in the future, like let's say if I get invited again, and Sunil was so nice enough to invite me back, you know, and if you can identify a project, we can diagnose it here together with you guys, right? And there might be some threshold, like if it's a brick project and there's already no flow out, we might not be able to talk about it, right? But especially if there's a project that you guys actually want to dive in deeper, I'm more than happy to do that, right? Yeah. Or we can even talk about projects that are successful in that case, right? Like project that you've already gotten grants money for, right? And we have already identified a hazard that we want to talk about, you know, we can do it that way too. So really, you know, a lot of possibilities. Yeah. But giving up is not one. So let's come back to the presentation. So this is what the summary of that project looks like. Right, once you hit, I don't know if the button showed up here. Actually, it didn't. There should be a finish button here. And once you hit that, this is what it looks like. To summarize, that generator at Carson City, Nevada, we have a BCA of 1.1. Okay, and notice how this is using 7% discount rate, right? But if this was a brick project, you're applying for a brick funding or FMA funding, you're actually allowed to use 3%. And this bumps up significantly. You see that difference? Right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. When can we actually use that 3%? So after you finish this, you want to go to view report. And then this is what that report looks like. And there's a little print report icon on the top. You really want to do this, right? I want to emphasize this point one more time because the calculator is a cloud-based calculator where FEMA is constantly making improvements. So the BCA information that I just put in right now is this value, but down the line, it might be worse, right? Especially if you're in that borderline, like let's say you're at 1.01 and like 2 months later, you did it again and it's like, you know, 0.98, right? So really important to do this. Really, really important to save it as a PDF.
You keep trying it until you get the number you want.
That's another thing too. Like a lot of times, I think, and it's based on my experience so far. Like what people tend to lean on is, you know they want to do a project, and then by the time they get to the BCA, they want to kind of like get through it very quickly, and you know they will do what you suggested, just keep playing with it until you get to 1.0. But that is not the way we want to go, right? We want to have a holistic approach. We want to look at our need, what's the project need we're doing, you know, and then go into the solutions. And then if the project is sound, the BCA should be 1.0. You know what I'm saying? Like in an ideal world, right? So I like to believe that, but you know, sometimes if it's in a really gray line, sure, that doesn't hurt, right? And then if it's in a gray line again, we're going to talk about something called alternative cost methodology. Next. So any other questions before I continue? Okay. Very good. So let's talk about pre-calculated benefits. So that is how you calculate BCA or BCR of 1.0 for your project, right? But you might be wondering, do I have to do this for all the projects? And the answer is no, because FEMA has funded enough projects now where we've actually standardized specific projects with a standard value of pre-calculated benefit that you can basically plug and chug and see if your project is viable or not in the eyes of FEMA. Okay? So projects that do not require a BCA analysis at all. Again, FEMA calculated several benefit cost efficiencies to provide pre-calculated cost effectiveness value. Using this pre-calculated benefit eliminates the requirement for applicant to conduct a separate BCA for eligible project. And again, I'm going to walk you guys through one more example. Again, generator being the center of it. Okay. So to summarize, FEMA has determined a default benefit value for certain project types. So this is not for all the projects. Okay, only certain project types. If the project cost is less than the benefit, the BCR would exceed 1.0 and the project is automatically deemed cost effective. So these are the projects, okay? Acquisition, elevation, and mitigation reconstruction in the special flood hazard area. Acquisition of repetitive loss or severe repetitive loss structure outside of the special flood hazard area. Residential hurricane wind retrofits. Non-residential hurricane wind retrofits. Residential tornado safe room. Post-wildfire mitigation, which includes soil stabilization, flood diversion, and reforestation. And generator for hospitals. So if you want to know, Saroj, like, what do you mean? I want to know exactly what these project types are in specifics, right? I also wrote that down. So under that hazard mitigation guide, part 12 lays out all the project types that mitigation projects are funded. Okay? And so part 12 of that, part 12, letter B is project types. And I can show you maybe after the presentation's over. I'll pop up the hazard mitigation guide, and I'll show you guys the two things that I just pinpointed, which was the benefits, what constitutes as benefits, and then the pre-calculated benefits project types. Where can I find out all of hazard mitigation project types? Does that make sense? All right, so let's dive in. So here's an example of the generator project, okay? So, so hospital generator projects. So here, for urban hospitals, FEMA is already slapping a standard value of $6.96 times the square footage of the hospital, okay? And for rural, it's $12.95 times the square footage of the hospital, right? So now, these are the pre-calculated benefits, right? BGSF is building gross square footage. So no, the parking area doesn't count. It has to be the building, right? So let's say your Carson City is doing a project of $500,000 and the hospital square footage is 75,000 square foot, right? Here you have a project that you can essentially just use a pre-calculated benefits right off the bat and not even have to go through that whole calculator I showed you in the previous slides. All right. So we simply just go with the square footage of the building times. In this one, we're assuming it's a urban area, right? And it already exceeds 500,000, $500,000, right? So does that mean our project is sound? That's right. It is, because 521 is a lot higher than 500, right? And boom, you've already done a benefit cost analysis. So pre-calculated benefits is super amazing. And of course, there's some caveats. Hospital must have an emergency department. Project has to be a standalone project, so it cannot be like a piece of a project. If part of a large project, pre-calculated benefits cannot be combined with benefits from other portion of the project. And urban and rural areas are defined in the memo. I think the memo is in the link here. Yeah, so there is a link there, but I think in your handout, there might not be a link, but in the PDF version, you should be able to click on that and it'll bring you to them. Okay. Okay, so this is the last topic I'm going to cover, so bear with me, guys. This is the alternative cost-effective methodology. And once again, this is only for financial year 2022 BRIC and FME application, right? Because the financial year 2023 BRIC and FMA NOFO hasn't come out yet. Officially, right? So this cost methodology is likely to be the same, but we don't want to assume that. Does that make sense? All right, so a little bit of background on it. It was issued October 6, 2022. And again, it only applies for BRIC and FMA, so no HMGP or 406, anything like that. And provides communities, especially underserved communities, an alternative to the 7% discount rate. All right, so let me walk you through this table, okay? Bear with me. Does everybody also have the handout? So maybe it might be helpful to go through the handout. So if the BCA is 1 or greater with the 7% discount rate, if it's yes, then it's already cost effective, right? Because that's what FEMA is looking for. FEMA is only looking for anything 1 or more, right? But if it's not, if it's less than 1, what happens? You go to step 1. Is the BCR less than 1 but greater than 0.75? So it's at that, like, you know, almost good area where it has potential to be good, right? Where it has the potential to surpass and get to the cost effectiveness side. Then you can, is a BCR 1.0 or greater with the 3% discount rate. So if you're using 7%, it's in between 0.75 and 1. But if you use 3% discount rate, does it exceed the 1.0? Yes. Then you also have to meet these criteria. But if it doesn't, then it already deems not cost effective. Right? So I'm going to touch on this criteria now. Right? So to summarize, is a project between 0.75 and 1 with 7% discount rate? And does it exceed 1.0 with 3% discount rate? There is something called alternative cost methodology that you can use. But in order for you to use that 3% to pass, right, and be cost effective, you have to qualify. Like one of these things has to be true. Okay? So an example here. Example here is the elevation example project in Washington, D.C. With a 7% discount rate, it's at 0.89, right? But with the 3%, and let's say it is a BRIC project that they applied for financial year 2022, it exceeds. Pretty good, right? So when can we use this? When can we use this alternative cost methodology? Let's talk about it. So there are 3 options. Option A, option B, option C, and option D. And within option A, there's 3 different options. You don't have to hit all of them, you just have to hit one of them. Okay? So I'm going to cover all of them now. So option A of one option within that option A. It's kind of confusing. Community with CDC SPI greater than 0.6. Primary benefits an area at the census tract level with a score of greater than or equal to 0.6 on the Center of Disease Control and Prevention Social Vulnerability Index. Right? So when you go to the CDC website, and if the community that you're doing project at exceeds that 0.6, then you qualify. You can use this alternative cost methodology again, only for BRIC and FMA, right? This is not for all of the projects. Really important, really, really important. We're going to the weeds, right? We're going to very specific things. And in this case, Washington County in Maryland does this 0.8, so they can use it. Option 1, but option 2 of option 1. Tribal or insular area. So tribal is, you know, all of the tribal community, and insular areas are all the territories like Guam and American Samoa and so on. So unfortunately for Nevada, some parts of it might work if you represent the tribal community, or project is in a tribal community, you can utilize this feature right away. All right. The last option with option A is economically disadvantaged rural communities. for brick only. And it's defined as a community with 3,000 or fewer individual identify the applicant that is economically disadvantaged, with residents having an average per capita income, annual income not exceeding 80% of the national per capita income based on the best available data. Right? So there's a particular eligibility, if you will, right, for you to be counted as EDRC community. And if you are identified as one of those communities, you're able to use the alternative cost methodology. The next one is project addresses significant impact caused by climate change. The project addresses a significant impact caused by climate change, such as more intense storm, increase in extreme rainfall, and extreme temperatures, and so on, right? You have to, the sub-applicant have to be able to demonstrate this. Describe how the project would enhance climate adaptation and resilience. Describe how the project is being responsive to the effect of climate change, such as sea level rise or other future conditions. And cite data, assumption, and model. So this kind of gives you a really open ending, right? It kind of gives you it opens up a window for you to utilize this feature, but you have to showcase that with documentation, right? Project has higher costs. Project is subject to substantially higher costs due to incorporation of low carbon materials or compliance with federal flood risk management standard, right? So low carbon materials could be recycling steel from, rather than, buying new materials, right? It could be bricks that you're buying that are that emits less carbon in the air by not, burning it to strengthen it, right? And so on. So again, you have to showcase that through documentation. It should include in cost estimate a narrative description to explain the increase in cost. And this one, project has significant unquantified benefits. The project provides significant benefits that are difficult to quantify or cannot be monetized or not captured in FEMA BCA toolkit. Again, build a narrative to do that, right? So in other words, these alternative cost methodology is such a useful benefit for you guys, right? From an applicant standpoint, when you're applying for your brick and FMA projects, if you're using low carbon emitted materials, or you're in a tribal community, or you're tackling climate change, you can already use that feature if you're in that threshold between 0.75 and 1. Does that make sense? Am I clear? Yeah. So this is like another benefit that you can use to warrant your project, for your project to be deemed cost effective. All right. So yeah, and that's my last slide. Thank you very much. Before I end, I do want to open up the hazard mitigation guide for you guys and showcase the benefit pages, if that's okay with you guys. Would that be helpful? Okay. So this is what the cover page looks like. We're using the latest one, so I think it's in cost effectiveness. Part 5. Yep. So under part 5, C1.1 project benefit. You click here, it really starts explaining what counts as benefit, like what is physical damage, right? Loss of service and function, injury or death, and so on. So it really goes into detail and explain to you guys what that means. Right? If you guys are going to, utilize those benefits for your projects. And the last thing I wanted to show you was the different project types, mitigation project types, which is in part 12. So we are part 5, part 12. So here it says mitigation projects. Part 5. So if you go to project types, which is B, it really outlines all the projects. What is property what is property acquisition? Eligibility for those, and it really goes into all sort of like, if you see here on the side, B1, like mitigation, reconstruction, structural elevation, stabilization, flood rate reduction, and so on, right? So it kind of like really lays out what project that we talked about that you could use pre-calculated benefits for, right? And so on. So, if you have any other specific questions, always can reach out to Janelle, and Janelle can reach out to us, and I hope this presentation was helpful. And you guys are going to come up with great HMGP and BRIC and FMA projects with fantastic VCA. So thank you very much.